Good afternoon. It is now 4:08. And the Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for Monday, March 25th, 2024 will please come to order. Let's go around the table for roll call.
Dan Ginestra.
Sheila Pryor.
Sarah Johansson.
I'm Heidi Cater.
Chase Anderson.
Valentina Ayers.
Paras Bende.
Thank you all for joining us today and for those who are watching at home. We'll start our meeting with an MTSS and READ Act update from Dana Miller of our Teaching and Learning Department and from Cassie
Coverden.
Van Coverden.
Yes.
That doesn't sound quite right, does it? We'll give it a shot there. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Anderson. Thanks for having us tonight. We're going to start out. We have two reports from Teaching and Learning tonight. One is on our MTSS, which is our multi-tiered systems of support. And then our second one is that ever-frequent READ Act update that we keep reappearing with. So with me tonight, I have Cassie Van Coverden, and she is our coordinator of MTSS. And then also not able to be with us tonight is Director Solveig Holiday, who with our Heriday, with our MTSS update, it's very strongly connected to our equity and inclusion work as well. And so really partnering with her in that work. So with that, the next slide here, let's see if we can get this one. Oh, it worked. This is our, many of us have heard about MTSS prior to that, and oftentimes we think of the pyramid that has different levels of support. But post-COVID, the state of Minnesota really expanded on their definition of multi-tiered systems of support. So that's why you'll see this Minnesota MTSS. And prior to that, you really just saw that third piece, the multi-layered practices and support. And while that is a piece of MTSS, it's greatly expanded. So I'm going to turn it over to Cassie tonight. We are celebrating with Cassie. 2 years ago, we applied for a grant to begin this work here in Wayzata or to expand on it. And we just recently were notified that we have received a grant for the second time. And so we're able to continue this work for our second term of that. And Cassie will continue in this role as MTS coordinator while we move forward. And so with that, Cassie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. So on here, you'll see that there's 5 different components. We were lucky enough to be in 13 of the districts in Minnesota received the grant. And we were in training with 22 other districts around the state where we had a team that went through all of these components, like the infrastructure, how are we functioning, what is our leadership, what are our core beliefs in our system, what is our mission, vision into family, and how are we communicating and engaging our families. And Dana had explained the multi-layered practices. How are we assessing those common formative assessments, and how are we making decisions? So we took 15 months. We met 4 hours every month with MDE and really learned a lot about what we were needing to have in place and what is that framework for continuous improvement and how do we align that to our work. So this is our district leadership team. We have on there, you can see Dr. Nate Flansburgh. We have the directors. There's some principals, associate principals, some from equity inclusion, from teaching and learning, a variety of all of us that again met for the last 15 months through the cohort, and that is now over. And we are now meeting once a month for about 2 hours to continue this work and to continue. There's subgroups that meet too out of this to continue.
I think you'll see that this is really tied very closely then to, I think it was our last evening board meeting, Dr. Flansburgh was here with doing the DOP update and then as well as the BILT. So this is a continuation of that work. So you will notice that some of those components tightly aligned with what Dr. Flansburgh was here speaking to the last time, because this is kind of all that work that goes into that DOP as well.
One of our first activities that we did together with MDE was to create our why and how does that support our mission and vision here in Wayzata along with really our equity commitment. So the reason the framework, we believe it would be, we want to see and celebrate each and every student to ensure success for all. We commit to continual improvement of our system so it is best supports teachers, builds upon the strengths of students and their families, and responds to their needs. How are we responding and how are we providing the support for teachers so that they're able to respond. And with that, we had to assess our district of where we were at. We took a 101 question survey on all 5 elements of our district, and from there we created priorities that we wanted to focus on, because if we can't focus, all of it is important, but we need to focus, otherwise none of it gets done, right? So we chose 3 goals and really working on that infrastructure and continuous improvement, looking at our tier 1 practices within our multi-tier layer of support, and then universal screeners. Our first goal was to have a common understanding of MTSS. What is it? How does it work? And through that, we needed to make sure that we had collaborative linked teams so that we can all have the common understanding and send the message from district to our buildings, to our professional learning communities, down to our RAP and support teams. And this work, really, what Dana had already stated, was defining what are those teams in our systems and how are they communicating, what is the purpose of them, how do we connect to each other, what are those communication loops, and really developing tight and loose for each team so that we have a common understanding and that we can continue to improve. Really, this slide was just to show how we create that desired student experience. We have the teams, and how does what supports do we have in our system to support those common goals, to meet every student where they're at and help them grow, along with sticking with the strategic directions of what the district is really supporting. Our second goal was on our tier 1 practices. So by the end of the year, we wanted to work to adjust and align our high functioning professional learning communities to support universal and effective tier 1 instructional practices. So how are we continuing to use our professional learning communities, and what is that? How the work that we started was really focusing on our foundations in our professional learning communities. What does that look like? How do we learn from each other? What instructional practices are we having? We know that equity is the work and it can't stand alone. So how are we helping teachers understand cultural behaviors? How are we understanding our basic needs of each student? What are those instructional practices linking with our core that's coming up? Those are great tier 1 strategies that will help to improve instruction. I'm just thinking about all of our professional learning that we've done to really strengthen that tier 1. And then we've also been taking our principals through with the support of the leadership team during Leadership Council, helping principals create success criteria for what are high functioning professional learning communities within our district, and how do we know that we are there? And if we're not, what are those action steps that we can get to there? So meeting everyone where they're at and helping everyone grow so that we are high functioning and that our tier 1 practices are supporting the instructional practices that we want to see.
Yeah, so you hear us talk quite a bit in education jargon. You'll hear us talk about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 levels of support. And what that really means, you'll see that all, some, few. So tier 1 are those instructional practices that all students are exposed to at grade level. So if you think of your daily student experience and they're learning in the classroom, that is tier 1 instruction. So grade level instruction. Tier 2 then is that some students maybe need an extra boost or an extension still on those grade level standards. And so oftentimes that also occurs in the classroom for some of our students that either need that boost or extension piece of that. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same student every time. I'm looking at those essential standards and I'm saying which ones of my students are getting this and which ones maybe need some additional support on grade level standards. And then that tier 3 few is for those students then that need another dollop on top. So we're still getting tier 1, we're still getting tier 2. If you think of kind of like an ice cream cone, if you will, and tier 1 is that first scoop. Tier 2 is that second scoop, and then tier 3 is I need some additional booster, maybe some skills I'm lacking that are beyond grade level, either beyond grade level or boost to get me to grade level. Okay, so I'm still getting that tier 1 and I'm layering on. It's not instead of, but it's in addition to. So as we hear about some of the READ Act work tonight, some of our intervention, you'll hear us also refer to that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And so that's really the work we've been doing with teachers this year, is focusing firmly on having that strong foundational tier 1 support. So how are we being responsive to the instructional learning needs, the behavioral needs, the student needs, that daily student experience of all of our students, because that makes the foundation of a strong multi-layered support system.
Yeah. And to help with that, we have a team, which we call our RAP team, our Wyzetta Reflection Action Plan team. So in there, you see the hexagons around the human. That's really, the team is really trying to identify, then they analyze, they create a plan. What are our instructional shifts? What are we going to teach? What data do we need to help identify this? Then we implement it, we monitor the plan, and then we go back and evaluate it. So when students are needing more support in Tier 2, Tier 3, this is a process that a team does to help support the students to really get to what the root cause and what they need, and how can we get those supports in place. So that was another. We strengthened, refined it this year, and the elementary schools have been working through this plan, and then hopefully this summer and into the next year, we'll be middle school and high school. Our third goal was on assessment, the universal screeners. We wanted to make sure that all teachers knew what universal screeners, the purpose of it, and how does it inform and respond to Tier 1 instruction. So there were some updates this year that we did. We had the K1 FastBridge are taking the universal screeners, and 6-8 used to take MAP, and now they're taking the FastBridge assessments. And some professional learning we did along this goal was, what is the purpose of it? It's a temperature check at that moment, and then how do we find out more information that we need? So we did some assessment literacy with all the teachers on how we can continue to gather more street level data or some map level data. And then how do we respond to it when we find out the data that we have and diagnostics?
I think for those of you that are new to the board, that street level, map level data is new language. And so that might be some work we want to do sometime and get you that book called Street Data. And so it's really looking at satellite data, or those type of screener data, or those type of assessments like MCAs or ACTs. And then as you break down the street level data, is what do I know in the space? What do I know on a daily basis that I might be gathering? Teacher intuition, what do I know about family? What do I know about how students are reacting? Those type of pieces. And so you're taking those different levels of data to develop a plan with. And one of the real goals this year, and this is where, again, doing the READ Act tonight comes in, is all schools using a universal screener as part of the READ Act. And as we've stated before, we were already doing that in grades 2 through 5, and then we were doing a little bit in 6 through 8 with those. And we already had that plan to move it to kindergarten and first grade, so just continue with that. But we have spent some time making sure our teachers know how to use that data, and how our leaders know how to use that data, how we know how to use that data, because data is only good when it informs our decision making and our planning. So really using that part of the MTSS training to lean into that data and say, how does it impact my instruction and my decision making just in time? Or we like to say, what does that mean on Tuesday morning in the classroom?
And then last, this is some work that we are continuing to do. April and May, we're continuing with the leadership team to work on that success criteria of what are high functioning professional learning communities. Our MTSS leadership team is still working on a handbook to have all this information in one place so we can refer back to it. We will go through our district self-evaluation again this spring to see where we were from last spring to this spring and our improvements. And then looking at updating or refining our year 2 and 3 goals. Summer work, again, moving into middle school around the RAP process. August Built Institute is really helping to educate the leaders and our Built teams more on the MTSS process and how we can continue to improve. And then workshop week, training some of the support staff. And your next school year is just monitoring our goals, continuing to work on our priorities. And we have a Tier 1 design team within our teaching and learning and equity inclusion, really trying to make sure that we have a robust Tier 1 and where are our improvements. And then that Tier 2, Tier 3, always continuing to look to improve. And also we've started to go into building self-assessments with West Middle School, and they felt it was very successful. So we're looking to see how that could move forward this summer or the fall with other buildings in our district. Yeah.
Questions for us? That was a very brief, high-level overview. It's very intense, deep work, and so we were trying to give that.
Board colleagues, what are your questions? Sarah?
Thank you so much. Congratulations on the continuation of the grant. I know you've worked really, really hard, and that just underscores the incredible work that we do. So thank you so much. There's so much, right? Another thing to lift up is just that importance of figuring out how do we use the results once we get them and how to do that. And it was really exciting to see that education around a systems level, right, from administrators down. My question for you is, if I'm a parent, I know my kiddo's getting tier 1, right? Because they're in the classroom, so they're getting that, although I might not know that. But how will I know if my kiddo is moving to a tier 2 or a tier 3? And what's that parental engagement around a child's progression through the scoops?
Yeah, so when a student is receiving tier 2, that's a lot of the classroom instruction, and that teacher's making those decisions typically within the classroom. If they're needing to have extra support come in or being pulled out, they're typically notified, and the classroom teacher has been talking and reaching out to the parent and asking, like, hey, this is what I'm noticing. Are you noticing at home? What are some strategies that you've been working on, or what works for you at home? This is what we're doing. They might, if they're going to come to a RAP team, they would tell the parents before that, we have another team that's going to help support and help me understand what I can do differently for instruction, along with what other supports we can offer your student. I'm going to bring them to the RAP team, and I'll call you after I'm done. So that's typically how parents, and then if there's any pullout services, they do receive a note and a signature to say that they were accepting of the services of having their student removed from tier 1 at different times of the day.
Thanks.
So I have first question is kind of extension of what Sarah asked. So is it applicable to, let's say, students who are struggling, or is it applicable also to students who are excelling? So maybe they are above their grade level, right? And now they need level 2, level 1 in different contexts. So how does that work? Do we
Yes.
cover that too? Okay.
Thank you for, yes, I should have said that in the beginning. Absolutely. When they're needing extensions or,
Okay, great.
Yep.
So my other question is, you talked about 100 plus questions, surveys. Who actually filled those surveys? Is it teachers, parents?
So that survey was taken by the district leadership team on that that third slide of all those leaders. It was us assessing where we felt we were at in the moment
Okay.
and throughout the process.
So were there any inputs taken from teachers? Is that part of the process? How that was considered in the whole process?
Yeah. So during that District 1, no, it was just an evaluation of what we have done at a district level. The building one, it's just a self-assessment in the building. That is done by a building leadership team. So that would be classroom teachers looking at that. It's about the same survey, but more geared to their building, not like district-wide.
Yeah.
And they would be taking that survey.
Okay.
That comes appropriate.
And it is all teachers, like not the representation, right?
It would be just the building leadership team. So anywhere from 8 to 10 teachers in the building that are on that leadership team would be
But it's
taking that.
reflecting on what is the building doing the work. So the questions for the District 1 asked a lot of questions around those 5 domains of MTSS, and you're assessing like where are we at in that. So do we have a universal screener? Do we have a data team? Do we have teachers that sit on data teams? Like it's questions like that. So you do that at a building level. So you have those principal representatives from each level or administrators from each level, district level, and that gives you an idea of what we should be working on. And that's how we got to the built, needing the built teams across the system, PLCs. And then at a building level, that the built team that Nate brought in would answer those questions as a reflection of all the teachers in the building. And then that helps the building know, it's kind of a self-reflection on where should we be putting our efforts from, what are our teachers seeing, where they think we need the effort.
Okay.
So
And
it's more in the framework questions,
Okay.
structures of things. Like, do we have this in place? Do we not have this in place? Do you know where the handbook is? No. Do you
Okay.
have a definition of your built team? Yes or no? So it's like really specific technical pieces.
Okay.
Say.
Okay. So let's say when we identify any improvements, right, or any process changes, will they be communicated with all teachers upfront? Will there be any kind of feedback session just to make sure we are really tackling the real problem, that type of things? How does that process works?
So hopefully within our builds, once our builds get more familiar with it and they're able to see what the semi is, that we're having those continuous feedback loops. So looking at where we set our priorities and then having them to see if those are the same priorities. If they're not, then what do we need to adjust and look at differently to make sure that we're all aligned and that we're all working towards the same common goals.
Okay, makes sense. And my last question is, based on what you have seen so far, how much is it building specific versus building agnostic? Meaning, are you finding the similar trends across all buildings, or some buildings are completely different than others? What's the observation?
Well, we haven't, only one building has taken it, and that was West. So I can get back to you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think from that leadership team, we did see it being district, not building specific. So for example, we needed to work on our PLC, our professional learning communities. That was a district view. Working with Dr. Flansburgh on the built teams, like we needed building instructional leadership teams in all of our buildings. So that was part of the work that flushed out of that. And then at the building level, they would be assessing where are they at in their built team? Like, are we talking about data? So in one building, they may do that really well. In another building, that might be something they want to look at. So once they take what they call the semi, which is their own the self-assessment, then they would know as I would know as a building principal, and we would look at that data as a built team that you saw here that night and build our goals based on being specific to our building.
Okay. And you said this is only being done in West right now. So
Our first year.
first year.
The whole MTSS in the district is being done across the entire district.
Okay.
But West was the only one so far that has taken the building self-assessment.
Building self-work. Okay.
Yep, and that's a year 2. So this was kind of like a trial. They were the first kind of our trial at it to see how it went.
So then we would go across all buildings at once, or it is going to be phase-wise kind of implementation, if you will?
Phases.
Phases. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And any priority, whether it is middle school first, elementary first, high school first, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, we've been going on the volunteer basis. Who wants to do that for us? I think our principals who are on the leadership team have been more quickly to volunteer for that work because it's really taking that deep dive into it with your built teams. So we're doing the work across the whole district, but now do I want to kind of like hone in more on our individual building?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. What's the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions? And if a student getting pulled out, do they do testing using FastBridge once a week and then see if the intervention works? How does it work out?
Yeah. So the difference between tier 2 and tier 3 is kind of that some and few. Tier 2 is still at grade level standards. And so it's in the moment intervention. So it might be I'm teaching a concept, I'm teaching addition of double digits, I don't know. And I may see that I have a student that's struggling with that concept. And so I might intervene in that moment and come up with a different approach to it. Maybe I do something hands-on, or I give them an additional a game to work on it, or I make some adjustments in the classroom. So it's kind of the art of teaching as I'm making those adjustments. Tier 3 can still be in the classroom, but it's very individualized, and it's for students that we've identified that maybe have some skill sets that are either behind grade level or they need to really accelerate because they're doing really well. So it's fewer students and it's more individualized. And oftentimes that's what we think of more of that pull out, like going to somebody else for intervention would be more at that tier 3 level. They are doing, and Julie would be able to speak more, they are doing regular consistent assessments based on whether they're doing the OG work or whatever intervention programming they're doing. FastBridge is not that. FastBridge is a larger assessment that is more considered at that satellite level. So you give it 3 times a year to measure growth across the system, and all students take that. So it's not a type of test that your assessment that you would take on a weekly basis.
They do have progress monitoring that they are progress monitoring, curriculum-based measures weekly. And again, Julie can speak more to this. And there is a component within FastBridge that they can get quick assessments to help monitor and have a growth and trend line and monitor the progress.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Dr. Anderson, is there anything? Well, thank you so much for that update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. It was nice.
Nice meeting you.
And we'll move into the READ Act updates. I know we're all on pins and needles, waiting to hear how that's going.
No, you can drive. All right, we'll get set up there and get right back at it then. So our second report tonight is our READ Act update. And the last time we were here, we had said that we would come back periodically as things continue to change regularly with the READ Act, both in our implementation and of the legislation as well. So we'll address those both tonight. With me, I have Austin Tollerson to my left. He's our Director of Teaching and Learning and oversees our reading and literacy programs. Also, I have Ann Fehrenbach, our Instructional Coordinator for ELA Elementary, as well as our EL K-12, and then Instructional Coordinator Julie Schneider, who is in charge of our literacy and dyslexia services. And that's why you saw us keep referring back to her tonight, so she'd be a good one for those intervention questions as well. Quickly, just I know, again, some of you have been here for all of our READ Act updates, and with new board members, we thought we would just do a real high, quick flyover reminder that the READ Act is Reading to Ensure Academic Development, so it does stand for that. It was passed last legislative session, and it has basically four main areas that we need to be addressing and that there's new legislation and continuing legislation around, and that's those assessment practices. So again, when you heard about those universal screeners tonight with MTSS, that's part of the READ Act, is the requirement of those to be done. READ Act 2 will now say 3 times a year, which we are already doing. It also has that curriculum component. So we were here not too long ago talking about some of the curriculum recommendations that have been made by the state level, and those are still in review, so there hasn't been a final decision around those. They also have some intervention pieces, and they're working on those recommendations right now. That hasn't completely been let out. And then professional learning is a big component of it. And a lot of our time tonight will be spent speaking around our professional learning plan. Also then, as we take a look, as I've said, our Fast Bridge Screener meets that assessment piece, and we have expanded that to K1 as well as 6-8 this year. Our curriculum is CCC. We are right now in the first edition. CCC second edition is being reconsidered, and we're being told that we will have that answer by May 1st. Just as a reminder, you do not have to, it's not a mandated curriculum by the state. It's just if you want to use some literacy aid dollars for it, you would need to use one of the state approved curriculums. Also, as a reminder that CCC, they did narrow that down, and CC is a curriculum that was included on the list that does comply with the science of reading. So that first tier of measurement, our current CCC curriculum met that standard. And then again, when we know May 1st, we would know whether or not we would already be in that review time to start looking at CCC second edition anyway, but we continue to wait for that. It's already been 5-6 years since we moved to CCC. And then, as I said before, we're still forthcoming on intervention, but we do know that a lot of the focus that they've been working on is on practices and not necessarily the stuff or programs, with a heavy emphasis on what does it look like to support not only students but our teachers. And so a lot of focus on a coaching model as well as those, so that's those practices. And again, that gets to that tier 1, tier 2 practices in a classroom. So how are we addressing the needs of students beyond just an intervention model as well? And with that, then, I'm going to turn it over to Julie, I believe, to continue to talk about our professional learning.
Yes, but I think there might be a slide skip.
Did we skip one?
Oh, and I see how it's not.
There's a
We have one
slide.
slide that's,
Somehow
is
not
it
in
hidden
there.
in there? You can see it on your screen,
Mhm.
right? Okay, well, is there, that's really strange. Let's see if we can, it's not hidden. Let me see here.
Professional learning science, yeah.
I can quickly copy it out of it. It's like it went away in the final.
There it is.
That is what I'm looking for. I don't know. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Amy. So the next part we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about is the professional learning that Ann and I have had the pleasure of starting to engage in. Just as a reminder, and for those of you that are newer board members, August 15th, MDE and CARE in collaboration identified 3 programs for professional learning, and those are listed there: CARE-all, CORE, or OLA, and LETTERS. And we spent a lot of time as a team just doing research, doing our due diligence to make sure that we were making a choice that we felt really. And so you can see CORE is bolded, and you've heard us talk about CORE a lot. We'll talk about it more tonight in detail because Ann and I are in the modules, so we're getting to see the learning firsthand and really excited about it. So there are a couple terms we talk in so many acronyms, and these aren't acronyms, but they're terms you hear a lot. You may hear them in emails or see them on public forums. So when we think about professional learning, all 3 of these programs were aligned with structured literacy and the science of reading. So when we talk about those, we just want to be really clear about what those are. So we have definitions up there. Structured literacy approaches emphasize highly explicit and systematic teaching of all the important components of literacy. So a lot of times you hear that in relation to phonics, but it's not just about phonics. It's about all foundational skills: coding, spelling, encoding, and higher level skills: reading comprehension, written expression, vocabulary, fluency. It really applies to all areas of reading. And then the science of reading, when we talk about that, it's not a tagline or something you see on a box. It's really about an interdisciplinary body of research about reading and issues related to reading and how students best learn to read and write. So it's research inside and outside of education, conducted over about 5 decades across the world. So from EdPsych, from neuroscience, all culminating in what we as teachers need to know about how students learn to read and why it's challenging for some, so that we can be better informed in making decisions for each child. I think this is, sorry, I think
We missed another one.
it's funny. I just like the slide. It's okay.
Yeah.
I think we're good to just go to this one.
Okay, I think that's me. So basically, we thought about our reasons why we chose CORE. Like Julie said, we attended a lot of information sessions. She and I both are letters trained as well. We've listened to MDE and we've done our research, and we came up with 3 main reasons why we selected CORE. Firstly, we see it as aligned with our strategic roadmap and equity commitment. We know it's high quality professional learning. Our experience in the modules right now, we're both really excited about it. I know we're both maybe literacy geeks in a way, but we really are enjoying the modules. And we see it as very much connected to our future and prior and our future work. So in terms of being aligned with the strategic roadmap and our equity commitment, we really see it as helping us provide that world-class education for each and every, reading being, of course, foundational to all academic endeavors. Exceptional student learning, this will enable us to provide even more high-quality instruction that focuses on the development of both language and literacy. You'll notice that CORE, the acronym, now also includes OLA, which is Online Literacy and Language Academy. So they're really focusing on both language and literacy there, which we see as important because it addresses all the areas of the reading rope, both the foundational skills and those more language-related skills as well. We also appreciated the focus on asset framing of both learners and teaching in our district's equity commitment. We see that playing out in the area of achievement, of integrity, and of respect specifically. Also speaking to the operational excellence, quality resources. You see here on the screen 2 high-quality texts that are part of the training. We have a lot of reputable literacy leaders are on board. Zaretta Hammond, Linda Diamond, Jan Hasbrook are all on the board of CORE, and it has a 25-year track record of success. So that's why we feel like it aligns with our strategic roadmap. In terms of high quality professional learning, you'll see here on the screen there are 9 modules that are fully self-paced asynchronous modules, and we'll talk a little bit more about, we have a couple slides that go into that a little bit more. There are 3 live synchronous sessions that follow up and provide opportunities to dive even deeper into the modules. We'll be working with core staff for those synchronous sessions. And then Julie and I are both working right now to become internal trainers. So we're going through CORE's Train the Trainer sessions right now. So we're really excited about that as well, because that'll enable us to continue the work. This slide has a lot of words on it. You can see here, these are the intended participant outcomes, and I'm not going to read this all to you, but I just want to highlight that you'll see in this list that it's identifying that it really does address all the pillars of reading. We're also really excited about the language development portion of this, that it really explores and helps us understand that how language develops and how it relates to literacy. Talking about EL and linguistically diverse students, as well as students who are diagnosed with dyslexia. So this is going to equip our teachers and all of us really to address the needs of each and every. We're feeling really confident about that.
So the next 3 slides have just a peek into the modules. Because Ann and I are training as trainers, we are going through a bit ahead of time. And on the side, you see some screenshots from just the interactive learning opportunities. And both Ann and myself, over our few decades in education, have taken a lot of grad courses, taught a lot of grad courses both in person and online, and this training we're feeling like is top notch. We're feeling so excited for Wayzata teachers that we're all going to get to experience this together. And the bulleted list I won't read to you, but just note there are just lots of different modes. Just the way students need to learn in all different modes, teachers benefit from that as well. So there's chats, there's videos, there's interactive graphics. There's some parts that are really kind of fun. And then as learners need to, teachers also need to process their learning. So these are some examples of written reflections throughout. There's a learning journal that you can keep track in either online, or they invite you to do it in the way that makes sense for you as a teacher as well, since all of different note-taking styles. There are also right-to-learn opportunities where you might experience a certain amount of content, and then they ask specific guiding questions to help you process the learning further. And then some in-practice activities connected directly to what you might do in the classroom, and usually connected to a video modeled of a teacher modeling that in the classroom. So lots of different learning opportunities there. And also important in learning is being clear on what are the learning targets and how are we as teachers in this learning moving towards those goals. So those 4 bullets have different types of assessments that exist within the core modules. You'll see pre and post knowledge assessments, the pre-check, just so we can help teachers consider what they already know, and then also front load what this unit is. Quick checks are just those, they're ungraded temperature checks throughout. Content reviews provide the opportunity to just have that time-spaced learning and reflect on what you've learned through section reflections as well. And then there also are post-knowledge assessments that are graded. They're not high stakes, they can be retaken. All teachers do need 80% accuracy on those, but where the content is right in the modules. They're not trick questions. So they're just really good opportunities for teachers to reflect on their learning and then go forward. The last slide that will just give you a peek into those modules are those textbooks. And if Ann and I had them here, you would see the Teaching Reading Source Book is a thick book. It's almost 800 pages. So it looks a little daunting first, but the teachers that I've shown it to that have opened it up, it is really user-friendly. It focuses on like the what, the when, the why, and the how. And all of those are sections throughout. So that of phonics, the what, why, when, how. It's so well laid out and teacher-friendly despite how big the book looks. So, and what I'd highlight is up there in the quote, through an analysis conducted by the National Council on Teacher Quality, they found that Teaching Reading Sourcebook comprehensively and rigorously covers the scientific basis and instructional elements of the 5 essential components of the effective reading instruction. So we're feeling good not only about the interactive learning that we're getting to participate in and the collaboration opportunities that we're going to have, but in the resources that teachers will take forward with them with practical examples of the how to collaborate around PLC teams. That's a perfect connection to the MTSS work that Dina and Cassie were speaking to earlier.
And then when we think about our connections to prior and future work, one of the things that is really, I think, helpful and allows us as learners, as teacher learners, is to take what we're already doing, reflect on it, and improve it. And this, the modules that I've been in so far, we are asked to dig into our core curriculum and use it, set it up next to what they're recommending in terms of practices, in terms of giving feedback to students, et cetera. And so I think that's a really strong piece of this, is that it's very practical in that we're analyzing and thinking about what we're already doing and seeking to make improvements to that based on what we're learning in the modules. Center for Collaborative Classroom has been affiliated with CORE for many years now, which is also a plus. We also really appreciate the cohort model, that this provides an opportunity for staff to work together and to the interaction in the modules, in the community chats and things like that. You get to talk with your colleagues right there in the module. So that's providing some relevance to the work, I think, at that level. And then just the fact that it's asynchronous, a lot of the learning being asynchronous gives us an opportunity to be flexible for all the participants. We also appreciated the idea of being strategic, calm, and asset-oriented when we talk about ourselves as learners. So what do we know and what do we bring to the work, and then what else can we learn? Of course, I think last time we were here, we talked about the schedule and how this training was going to play out, that there are some advantages to that asynchronous piece, and that we've been able to figure out how to do this within the teacher contract. And then having us as in-district facilitators will allow us to onboard new staff and continue this work as we move forward after this initial launch of the training. Then on the screen here, again, this is an article that we're not going to read this whole thing to you, but this is a text that we read in the first module. It's one of the very first pieces in the training, and it talks about the impact of teachers and how that the impact of the teacher on student achievement is primary. And I think that's nothing new to us. But I think the idea for us and why we have this here is that we see this not as a one and done piece of the work we're doing. In fact, as you know, we've already started some training in the area of structured literacy with Orton Gillingham that we'll talk about in a minute. But that idea that it is the teacher in the classroom with the kids who makes the difference. And investing in this training we see as really exciting and impactful. And we're thinking about ways we can weave that into our coaching, into our work with principals. So we're just really excited because we know that teachers matter. And the RAND Corporation, this article brings out a study by the RAND Corporation that shows the evidence of that. So again, we're really excited about this training.
Okay, so last bit here is really that question that we had some questions last time about Orton Gillingham and the training that kindergarten teachers, special education teachers, and literacy interventionists have engaged in for the last year plus. And what about Orton Gillingham and the READ Act? One piece to be aware of is that the official reconsideration process is not yet out. There are two different things that we've heard about, and sometimes they're confused. There is a waiver, and some surrounding districts have applied for MZOG to be approved, and it has been. So it has been that honors the work and the commitment our teachers have done, and so the state has acknowledged that work meets the criteria for professional learning, which is exciting, as our teachers have put a lot of time and effort into this learning, so it validates that learning. And Wayzata is also going to have the district K-5 do core for that systems approach. So those primary teachers, K and 1 and literacy intervention, will have the partnership of core plus the practical of OG, which is really exciting for our students. So the official, it's approved via waiver through July 1, 2024. And then when the reconsideration process comes out, some districts may be applying, but that's not available yet. But what we did want to highlight, because it is the work of the READ Act and teachers are really excited about this, I think it's really important to bring in teacher and student voices into the boardroom. So we have just 3 slides. Now I asked for a short paragraph. I just sent an email and said, would you be willing to provide just a short paragraph? And I didn't do any guiding. I just said, of the impact that you've seen. So this is from a Meadow Ridge kindergarten teacher, and because I'm not going to read all of it to you, though you do have it all in your board packet, so you could read. I just highlighted a few things. Otherwise, it's verbatim from email. She said, being trained with OG has positively impacted our letter instruction. My teammate and I were so excited that we started implementing new routines before we even completed the training. The multisensory approach also makes it fun for students. I would highlight that. Students ask if we are going to write our sounds in the sand. Provides consistent decoding practice, helps secure their sound knowledge. With the blending board, we can blend what feels like countless words in just 1 minute, and we can target sounds to differentiate what is needed in our classrooms. Our students are blending and reading decodable words earlier and with more fluency than in years past. And then she ended with, we have used writing rules for reversals and rules for spelling patterns that we didn't even know existed. This is probably some of the best reading training we've ever had, and that gave us not only deeper knowledge of reading, but tools for immediate use. And I would highlight that these are already awesome teachers. I've seen them teach before this training. They were already amazing, and they were excited about it. So I'd love to read, though I love everything that she said, but in the interest of time, we're gonna move on to the next one. That was a Meadow Ridge kindergarten teacher. A Northwoods kindergarten teacher said, my team and I jumped for joy when it was announced that kindergarten teachers would be receiving Orton Gillingham training. We have loved the direct, explicit instruction approach that OG offers, and we are happy to report our data has shown strong readers in the areas of letter recognition, sound production, decoding, and encoding. The routines ingrained within OG instruction have proven to be engaging for our kinder kiddos, activating their ears to hear, mouths to speak, eyes to see, and hands to touch for a true multisensory approach to learning how to read. So that's from that teacher. And one more. This is something happening at Sunset Hill, where a literacy specialist and a first grade teacher and the whole team are teaming to approach needs a little bit different. And so one first grade teacher is partnering with a literacy specialist for a block of time every day. And here's what they said about their collaboration. At Sunset Hill, the first graders who need the most support with reading, which includes some intervention and special education students, are being team taught in collaboration with our reading intervention team. And then they talk more about it. You'll have that to read. But she says, students are engaged using OG's multisensory approach as they tap words, use bumpy paper to learn sight words, dissect the text, hunting for words they know and words they can solve, and incorporate movement to make the learning stick and be fun. In addition to this, the classroom teacher and the reading interventionist have worked closely together, learning from each other, and been able to incorporate OG methodology into the CCC set instruction. 14 of our students began first grade a year behind. With our targeted focus and collaboration, these students have made great gains and received a year's worth of small group instruction in 5 months. And then she says, in summary, the benefit of providing reading instruction layered with the OG approach has truly supported all learners for our first grade classrooms. Just really excited to hear teacher and student voice and see some of those pictures that were on the other slides. So we'll move on from there, and I can take any questions about that later.
So then that gets us to what's next. We were scheduled to start our our core training this Friday. But as all things that often happen when we have legislation going into action, there has been a delay on the state's end with NDE and the signing of contracts with our provider. And so our amazing team did a little bit of a pivot for this Friday. And so our teachers won't quite start yet on this Friday. Instead, they'll be digging into those tier 1 practices and some of the essential learning standards, which is all very good work. And then we will go ahead and be ready to start on April 8th. With our first session. And then we'll be looking at how we get those 4 hours back. If you remember, we came and we had that all plotted out. And that's what gets us to READ Act 2.0. And so you'll be hearing a lot of chatter around that. It's House File 3744 and Senate File 1273. And we have had the opportunity. I met with Representative Edelson last week. Julie has also spent some time with her. Julie is going to be meeting with Representative Westland. I have been in contact with Representative Bakeberg, who sits on that, as well as attending all the MDE webinars and open office hours. And we continue to engage that to try to give a Wayzata voice to this work as well and let them know what is working well in implementation and where we could use some more supports. And I think one of the places, these are kind of the top hits right now that are included in different forms in both of those files. And one is requiring that mid-year screener, which we're already doing. So that FastBridge screener, doing it as a winter check as well, and we're already doing that. They're looking at trying to provide some more curriculum or professional learning money. And so one of the things I think they've heard loud and clear, as we heard from our teachers too, is it's really nice that they're attempting to pay for the curriculum part of the training, but the real expense and struggle for district is in how do we compensate our teachers. So again, we've been fortunate to work closely with the WEA as well as HR and try to find a way to blend this into a teacher day. But as you know, it has meant stopping other things. And so they're looking at how they could provide money for some possible stipending for teachers. They're also looking along with that on, if not money, then how might we adjust our calendar and looking at providing some relief and direction for you as a school board on how we might do that. And so we're waiting for that to see where they come with that, and then we'll decide how we pivot to make up for those hours. They are listening to the need to have a higher education focus and looking at the teacher licensing and an audit of our current teaching programs at higher ed and seeing if this will be something that eventually this level of course will be something that you would pick up in your teacher training prior to starting teaching. And we think that would be a really important addition. Until then, we will continue to not only train our teachers this year, but as they come in new to us to make sure that they have this solid foundation as well. And that's why I just want to publicly say how appreciative I am of Ann and Julie going ahead and getting that train the trainer training and jumping into this early and adding it to their plethora of training as well. And then there is some language in there about training for volunteer organizations and libraries and Reading Corps. And then there was in the READ Act 1.0 some conversation about how we train our paraprofessionals, especially those involved in reading. And so there's been some confusion around that. And I think they're working to clear that up. And Carrie and MDE are supposed to be creating some paraprofessional training around that would be ready in November as well. So that's right now. Again, none of that is in legislation, but it might be an opportunity as board members. This is a way to get active with your legislators again and let them know that some relief to help with this training. This is amazing training. We're super excited about it. I tell you what, Julie and Ann, you think of all the training they've gone through and to be just as excited as they've come from having done what they've done. They really believe it's going to be high quality for our teachers. And so I know Austin and I and the rest of the team look forward to all of our principals will have this training as well. So all leadership will be engaged, and we're excited to get started on that with our teachers too. But we could use some help and relief as far as implementation is planning, and a little help on encouragement that MDE and the legislation can get in alignment on their timeline so that we can meet those that are established for us as well. And that would be super helpful too. So with that, we'll take questions tonight.
Thank you so much. That was very comprehensive, and it was great to hear about the legislative updates that you've heard. Board colleagues, do you have any questions or comments?
I have two questions. On OG methodology, just to confirm, so right now the decision hasn't been made, but we can continue with OG methodology that we've been following, and we have a waiver so we don't have that July dead end, if you will, right? Did I hear that right? Or
Oh, the waiver. Yes, we can continue that. It was not in the original list of 3 approved, which there were a lot of districts around that really thought it would be or felt like it should be, that have petitioned since then and had their waiver approved. There are some stipulations around if you do the waiver, then that was your professional learning seat for that teacher. So we are not completing it, but we know nearby districts that have completed it and that it was approved. It follows structured literacy. It's very explicit on the ground practice. So we're seeing good results. And so we're going to continue with that, but it's not, it may be once the reconsideration process comes out, it may be approved, like they might add to those 3, but that's to be determined. So
Okay. And do we know what that timeline would be, or
they
it's
have not given
they
us
have
a
not given
timeline. That
us?
wasn't in legislation as far as that date of reconsideration process. They've just said it's in development.
Okay.
Yeah, so they had districts who had already done OG as their training for their entire district. Like some had done letters, and so they were seeking to have OG be count, if you will, towards their READ Act. And so that waiver will allow them, but you have to be done with that by this July. So I think that's where
Yeah.
the July came through. We're going to do the core and then layer OG on top of it because we really believe that that strengthens our program. So we're kind of doubling down on that. And in fact, Julie will be offering an optional session, I believe, for our first grade teachers this summer as well. And then once we get through core, then we'll make sure we get all of our first grade teachers done too.
Okay. Okay. And the second question is, have we heard any suggestions, concerns from teachers, right? So again, there are different 3 methodologies, and I know there were few emails on core versus letters. So are we still hearing that from teachers, or have those concerns been addressed and core is what we are moving forward with?
Yeah, I've never received any email on the why. I think one maybe came to you all on why not letters or is letters light. And again, all 3 of these were selected by the state as equal gold standard training. And the connection of core to our curriculum is really one of our strong drivers on this piece. And then how it can attaches to our other professional development we've done is the alignment to core is just super solid for us.
Okay. But we're not hearing any of those concerns from our teachers, right, at this time?
And maybe they're going, I have not had
Okay.
a single teacher ask me about that. That doesn't mean it's not a question out there. We've both completed letters ourselves. We know that it was a good training as well. And we're very happy with core, but I haven't had anyone ask.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Any other questions, board colleagues? Yeah, Valentina.
I might be repeating somewhat a question, but I'm still curious because the parents who, especially the parent who contacted us, she had dyslexia. She has dyslexia children, and I suspect when you have children, I mean not even one, you spend quite a bit of time and money making sure that your kids are reading. I'm curious why not letter. I just would like to.
Why not letters?
Why not letter? Why
Mhm.
core versus letter? Is it about money? Is it about time? What weighed more towards core versus letters?
And we can all probably add things in, but the strategies for dyslexia and thinking about the science of reading, structured literacy are present within core, they're present within letters, and I haven't seen Carry-All, it was just developed, but that was a requirement to be in all 3 of those programs. They were all 3 identified as gold standard programs. So I wouldn't say that one is better than the other for dyslexia, or I don't have any research or anyone up in higher ed telling me that one is better. Again, both are good options. People that have gone through letters have also been happy with it, and we guys can chime in for our district with our core curriculum, with some of the other pieces around how core frames learners, not as struggling readers, but as readers in development, asset framing readers. It really does, it will address dyslexia as well, just like letters does. But do you have anything you would add?
I do. Okay. The one thing I would add with my English learner hat is the focus in core on language development and the depth to which so far I've seen the modules go into how language develops and what it means, what's needed to teach students learning English how to read is very strong. And I know that's something as our English learner population grows in our district, and as we have more and more students coming with early levels of English development, I think our teachers are going to really benefit from that knowledge. That's one of the things I'm really appreciating. Letters certainly addressed that, but I think to greater extent that I see that in core. personally.
And I think you also addressed mine. The state, again, identified these three as their gold standard and meeting all their criteria. And then they're paying for all three of these as far as the curriculum is concerned. And so they're confident that these three training meet the needs of all of those. And I was trying to quickly get back to when we were here in December, which would have been again before our new board members. But you're going to see, I think, Julie, we had the information on the districts around us. A lot of our districts around us are also going to that core training. So Letters was one of them that was out there kind of early on in that, but I can certainly go back for those of you that are new and share that presentation we had back in December where we compared all of those three gold standard ones for everything they contain. And they're very tight. And again, both Julie and Ann have been trained in both Letters and core, feeling confident in both of those that they're delivering the same content.
And one quick add that I would say is also this is part of the learning. Like we view this as a piece of the whole. It's important that everyone's getting all those foundational pieces. Like this year, I taught an academy class on dyslexia for classroom teachers. So there are lots of other opportunities for learning to springboard from this, both already existing and that will develop. So we'll just keep tending to all those needs as those things come up. But this is like a good launching pad for everyone to have some consistency K-5, and learning isn't a one and done thing, so we will just keep learning.
And I would like to double check again with what Paris was asking. I remember quite a bit of teachers came with concern and asking about timing, about when we can do and all. I believe you organize some sort of where we can put questions or where we can find answers. My concern is, do teachers, really at this point settle down and things work out for them and they agree, majority at least agree that yes, this particular one is good for us, and thinking about time and how much time we have to put into training, did things work out for teachers?
Yeah, I think so. We've been able to, and I'm going to try and I was trying to find the sheet so I have the exact hours. I want to say 50.
There's for the modules.
Yeah, we built in about 52 hours of the 48 that are needed, I believe. So we have been able to etch out in our contracted PD time, match the hours that are estimated to take for core training. And so that's not something a lot of our districts around us have been able to do. So that's one of the reasons REDAC 2.0 will be addressing that as well. We're also offering teachers the 16 hours of QComp all class pay if they would like to. So they'll have some additional pay in that. So for example, April 8th is a PD day, and that we would be using 4 hours from that PD day to do that training. We have made some adjustment in response to teachers. So one of the things we heard is that June 7th being a synchronous day was a struggle. They weren't sure they wanted to do that. Some teachers we heard, yes, please. And so it's just like in a classroom when you're trying to meet the needs of all of your learners, you kind of have to have multiple approaches. And so we aren't mandating anything on June 7th now. Teachers can approach that synchronous time whenever it works. And so Julie and Ann, because they're being trainers, will be able to offer that in August as well. So now if our teachers don't want to use that last day of school for core training, they won't need to do that. And so we've been really responsive to that piece. And then on our teaching and learning website, we have just right at the top, it says REDACT. And if you click on that, and I'd encourage you to do that, all the communication that we've been having with teachers is out there. The schedule is out there. The frequently asked questions document is out there, and you can just go right to those questions. So I think as a team of teaching and learning, along with help from WEA and HR, we've been able to do the best we can to meet the needs of our teachers. That being said, this is an add-on to their plate. I think it'll be valuable and important to our student learning, but it is an additional ask. And so that's why this is our PD plan for next year. So we're not asking them to do this in addition to additional PD. We're clearing out the plate for this at that time. So
Thank you very much for clarifying.
Any other questions or comments, board colleagues?
Austin's just whispering in my ear there, he found the right hour. So it's 48 hours that we've given them for
a 45-hour certification, and then there's 12 additional hours in the all class if they choose to take the all class for next year.
That's what I get for trying to do it off the top of my head on a Monday.
All right. Thank you so much, Julie, Austin, Anne, and Dana, of course. Thank you for this update.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening.
So our next presentation is from Finance and Operations. And we'll welcome Scott Lesage to the table. Thanks, Scott. We're going to start with the 2024-2025 budget preparation update.
All right, Nate just told me a few minutes ago when we got here, he goes, oh no, you're one of those guys that spreads out and takes over the whole table. So, Nate, you don't have to worry now. You got your corner, so. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, members of the board and Dr. Anderson, for the opportunity to come here this evening and talk to you about our budget preparation process. I think it's important to go through this just because outside of our audit, this is our heaviest lift for our finance and operations team and a lot of the leaders in the district, just because it's such an instrumental thing and it's obviously how we run the district. So, and I would also argue just with cost containment times and still recovering for the pandemic, it's the stakes are very high right now. So we spend a lot of time on it. So perfect. If we want to go to the next page. I'll just kind of run everybody through kind of the timeline. I know that my predecessor, Dee Dee Caring, had come to the board, I believe, in January and kind of gone through a really summarized approach to the budget planning process. This will get a little bit more in depth and we'll kind of talk to a few additional things. And then at the end, definitely feel free to ask questions, or if there's questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to interrupt. So, like I mentioned, this is our kind of our heaviest lift. A big positive, some people might look at it and go, oh no, we've got a pretty new team in finance too. We also have some seasoned people, David Draskovich and Jen Welk, that are here that have been instrumental parts of my team, and they will only become bigger parts of my team. So excited to have them here with me tonight. I think this is also great because with kind of new people, we take a very new approach. We have fresh eyes on everything. And I think both David and Jen and the rest of our team, including some of the executive directors, would say we've kind of blown up the old process and we really changed kind of our methodology and going to more of a decentralized approach where we work with the budget managers directly. Very similar to what the board saw last month, and especially for us at the finance committee of the board meeting. We work very in depth with, like Wayzata Cafes, community ed, to make sure that we're in communication of them, because our numbers are only as good as what those experts can help us predict as well.
I was going to mention there's a slide advancer on the table there that you can use.
Perfect. That's great. All right. So perfect. So like I mentioned, I'll run through the timeline. I'm going to cover some of the key factors and background that go into the budgeting. I'm going to talk about the cost containment process, enrollment projections, some of our budget assumptions, and then the next steps. So here, you guys are probably familiar with seeing this slide. Like I said, I know my predecessor used some of these slides in the past. Some of them just were updated. So January is when I mentioned she came with the budget assumptions. February, as you recall, we came to the board with the budget revisions. Just a reminder, and in the past fiscal year, we came with 2 revisions. This year, we will be doing the same. That's very typical for school districts to do. It also is the groundwork as we work on the preliminary budget for the coming year. It's especially helpful, especially when you're in situations like we are, where we're recovering from the pandemic and we're dealing with cost containment. It allows us really to zero in on those costs. In April, we're going to be coming with our capital-related budget. That's something you've seen in the past that will come to the board. The reason that it comes to the board so early is that authority by the board then allows us to kind of move forward with some of those costs. As you know, that In schools, just like everything, it's not perfect. So our fiscal year ends June 30th, and that's when a lot of the projects are done or when a lot of the ordering takes place, and that takes time to get in. So April and May, that's when we're going to be coming with those budget updates. I would assume that we will come with the revised probably closer to that May deadline, and then we will also look to June and hopefully the first meeting in June to come with the preliminary budget for next year. All right, so like I mentioned, I just again want to thank David and Jen for being here. Jack Stearns and Carrie Lynch are also huge parts of our budgeting team, and then we work with the different area expertise managers. So as you can see here, we take a really team approach. I pointed out on this slide just some of the key areas that we focus on in districts, especially like ours, and I would argue districts all over the state. Some of the areas that are absolutely crucial to pay attention to, because they can really get out of control quickly if you're not watching them, are the ones mentioned up top, and that's with our federal dollars, especially with the CARES-related dollars we've had over the years. We've been grateful for those dollars, but I'll get into it once we get into the presentation. But we're also a little excited that those are going to be winding down. And I don't want to speak for Jen Welk, but I think she might echo that same thing. I think she's probably tired of creating spreadsheets and having me ask her twice a week where we're at. So I'm sure she won't miss that. Our special education dollars, those, of course, were mandated to provide those services, and it's crucial that we have a financial partner. Jen Welk works with our Director of Special Services, Jenny Nias, very closely, and they're able to kind of keep us in the loop on that, and then we monitor it as a greater executive team as well. Achievement integration, Jen works with Solvay on that, and then we also have a lot of other specialized grants and budgets that we monitor. Our revenue budgets, including our state aid, levies, and miscellaneouses, that would be, I know it hasn't been totally announced yet, but that is something that I work on along with our new Director of Finance, David Draskovich. So he and I spend a lot of time on that, a lot of nights and weekends. So that's when we do our best work, is outside of regular hours, because then our brains are clear to think. Salaries and benefits, that's also something that David and I tackle, but it's in conjunction with the HR team. I think whether it's good or bad, I think Stacy would say it's probably a really good thing that we are partnered right next to them in the building too. So David Lutz and I have jokingly said we were going to cut a hole in the wall, and then we could just be able to converse constantly. So we appreciate their partnership. Buildings and site budgets, you can see a huge part of our team work on those. And they work with the different people inside of the buildings. Activities and extracurriculars, very similar. Carrie Lynch being over at the high school, she's part of our team. That is also a huge benefit for us, just because that is the largest high school in the state, and we have a lot of students in there, and it really helps to have someone on our staff over there. Capital projects and LTFM, obviously the board knows those are pretty significant dollar amounts for us. LTFM, last year, I think we're at about 16 million. We didn't fully spend that, but obviously we're decreasing that to offset the bond issue that we did. And then we have our capital projects. So that's something we work with John Deutsch and his team on that we go through. And that's also related to the 10-year plan that you'll see in the next few months coming up. And then technology, based on our tech levy and other technology needs, that's something that David Draskovich works on with our Director of Technology, Wade Phillips. And like I said, if you have any questions during the presentation, please just feel free to stop me. Government structure. All right, so this is something that you've seen. You probably saw it last month when we presented the Wayzata Cafes and the community ad. This is a little bit different just because I wanted to change it up so you weren't seeing the same stuff all the time. But this just highlights how school districts, although we have all these different areas of the budget, they all are separate. So our food service is very separate from our general fund that we talk so much about and that we're talking about cost containment with. The same with community ed. And our building construction fund, anything over 2 million, and then of course our debt service fund. So those funds for the most part, as a general statement, can't be really mixed and matched. Of course, as I mentioned at the last board meeting, food service and community ed, the general fund would have to bail out if they were staying in a negative fund balance. All right, so I just thought this would be interesting to kind of go over because it kind of highlights there's a lot of different reasons that we are where we are, and there's lots of questions. So I think it's appropriate just to give kind of a history and then bring you up to current where we're at. And then the next slide will touch on the future. So as you can see here, the district received 4% on the formula in the current fiscal year, and next year it drops back to the 2%. If you also recall, there were some unfunded mandates, which we'll touch on later in the presentation. So probably, David, and correct me if I'm wrong, each 1% is probably worth about $850,000 to $1 million for the district. So when we have some unfunded mandates, that gets eaten up very quickly. For example, some of the statute language that really wasn't publicized, they changed some of the statute language. So dollars that were just able to be used in the general fund now have to be used for specific purposes and can't be supplanted dollars. So that poses challenges to districts. And as we all know, especially with the very unknown summer unemployment, that's another big unknown one. So I just say those things to point out that, yes, we are grateful for the 2%, but we also have to keep in mind that it's not a true 2%. Now, if we kind of look back, you can see on the screen, I won't go through each year, but I did add a little verbiage from the original presentation that was posted that I think you guys saw. You can see over on the right there, besides this year, it's always floated around that 2%. One year we got up to 2.5%. If you go back to 2014, we're around 1.5%. But then if you go back before that, I could have been going back, but Chase told me I only had 20 minutes. So I probably should start moving a little bit too. But when you look at 2009, 1%, 2010, 0, followed by another 0 and 11, and then 1% and 1%. I think we obviously recognize that inflation and just our normal day-to-day costs, even during, after 2008, were much higher than what we were getting. I'm guessing, I wasn't here, but I'm guessing we weren't negotiating 0% raises. So just food for thought. Obviously, I recognize that that's on 60% of our dollars. So it's not a true just 1% because we do have a increase on our levy, but that still barely keeps up with any sort of inflationary pressures. All right. The next slide is just kind of showing just the current fiscal year, the 4%, what we will get for next year based on the legislation from 2023. And the reason I have this slide is then it kind of points out to FY26 and FY27. That's where things kind of change. Obviously, we know that things can change with new legislative sessions, but basically how it will work is there'll be a floor of 2%, and then there'll be a ceiling or a cap of 3%. So obviously, in our budgeting nature, especially in cost containment, we're really trying to balance our conservatism of budgeting and then trying to factor in like a reality standpoint too, where we want to get absolutely as close as we can. It's been historical practice before we kind of knew a floor and a ceiling that most districts would go 0% or like 1%. And I think a lot of people, because I've been asked it too at prior districts, why do you go with that? You know that you're going to get more than that. And then we show the previous slide and we're like, really? So we always have to be conservative because if we project that money, that's $1 million, $2 million that we might not get. This is a great slide. This is a slide that from our partners at Ehlers. They put together this slide and it's been at a lot of our professional development and learning through MASBO, but this really highlights the impact of the Gen Ed formula not keeping up with the rate of inflation over the years. The solid blue line on top shows you where it should be if we kept up inflation, and then of course the dotted orange line shows you where the current environment is. All right, I didn't even realize I put something fancy on there. All right, so then if we look at this slide, we'll kind of go through the current reality and planning for the current or for the upcoming budget. So Because the levy is basically a year in advance, we know what we're getting. The 3.8 is based on just the general fund dollars. That's separate from the community ed, that's separate from the debt service. But we'll get about 3.8% on about 34% of our revenue. There has been questions that I've been asked about, does the district have any opportunity with the levy to gain additional dollars? I know that's been talked about a few times. We have about $40 available per student, but if you do the math, that would only be about just under $500,000 that we would generate on that. And I don't think you would go out for an election for that. So just because we were talking about that, I wanted to mention that. The formula allowance, and I kind of touched on this before, but it goes from 4% in the current year back down to 2%, and expenditures are not going down. The special ed cross subsidy, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this. We were extremely grateful for this revenue that came in through legislation. It really was like huge. It was huge for us. But I'll kind of talk about why, yes, it's huge, but there was other things not addressed. So as you can see here, 44% of the cross subsidy for the fiscal year for 24 through 26, and then it jumps to 50% on FY27 and later. So just to kind of break it down to its simplest form, basically that means that we will get about 75% overall reimbursement on our special education costs. That's probably a pretty fairly conservative approach. I think it'll probably end up between 74 and 78%. It's something that we're looking at constantly just because, overestimating revenues in special ed can be very problematic for a district, especially a district like ours that has 20 million, north of 20 million in special ed costs. So as I point out there, the general fund is still covering 25% of the costs. We are also experiencing and projecting pretty big substantial increases in our special ed costs. That was one of the big budget variances from our budget that was presented in February. We're seeing a pretty high increase in costs over the prior year. We're expecting that also to continue, and that's something that the district has been meeting with the different area leaders in that, and something that we're talking about constantly. So I'll kind of back up and say this is absolutely fantastic revenue and much needed revenue. But the challenge in that they really didn't address was the fact that we're seeing massive increased needs. So when you're talking about north of $20 million and you're going up by $1.5 million to $2.5 million projected in the coming years, well, that number just keeps getting bigger. So if you do the math on the 25%, that's hitting your general fund, right? That's hitting your unassigned fund balance. So the way that it would work and where a district would really get ahead is if we would have come out of the pandemic and there wouldn't have been the special ed needs that we're seeing. And let's say they just increased by $1, just because we always use that. A district would see a huge relief from this legislation, right? Because all of a sudden you'd have this additional cost covered that you didn't in the past. So that's where I say we're grateful for the dollars, but then the reality of the situation is we are seeing substantial increased needs, which will then in turn turn into costs. COVID-related dollars, I mentioned about this. We've got we're projecting about $200,000 left after the end of this current fiscal year. And those I think they all have to be spent by 9/30/2024. And we do have a plan in place. I know Jen's been working with Executive Director Dana Miller and her team and to basically kind of wind down those funds. Our federal allocations, that's not a one that changes drastically. In prior years, if you looked at past board stuff, you would see fluctuations, but that was all driven by the COVID-related dollars that fluctuated those. And as a reminder, those are dollars that you have to expend before you can draw on. This is all over the board. If you search the internet, you'll see a whole bunch of different views. But based off of the sources that we use, we're anticipating anywhere from 3% to 6% inflation next year, depending on the cost area. So the reason I say that is we might see higher costs in our insurance that we've talked about, our health insurance. We'll also see increased costs in some of our utilities that we've been experiencing. We could also see that continued in our transportation. Our student growth is returning to pre-COVID levels. I'll kind of touch on that in the following slide. but it is increasing, but we aren't nearly where we thought we'd be at this point. And I'll touch on that at a later. And then cost containment and continuation. There's a lot of moving parts and we are continually reviewing and monitoring this area. I think it's kind of a daily thing that we're thinking about, and then we're doing a lot of analyzation on a monthly basis, and that's why at a minimum we'll come back with one more revision. There is a lot of moving parts. I know a lot of people think, well, you know what you need to cut, you know what you need to do. There are substantial moving parts, especially in a district like Wayzata, where we are seeing increased costs, we're seeing inflation, we're seeing student growth again, and we're also dealing with the fact that we had a massive, massive impact from the COVID pandemic. I know that people kind of might go, come on, that was years ago. It had a tremendous fiscal impact on this district, and I'll kind of explain why. Not every district is the same too. So, and then just kind of highlighting, just because it was asked at the last one when we presented our revised budget, we're still showing revenues over expenditures of north of $2 million. We think it might even end up a little bit better than that, which then puts our unassigned fund balance over the board goal of 5 to 7%. There's a reason for that, and that kind of is what I was alluding to in the prior slides, where we're seeing expenditures outpace our revenues. And so we have to get ourselves in a position, because we already start to see the fund balance decline starting in FY26. So I think that's something really important to point out. Let me see, what else was I going to add? Just comparing to districts around us, just to some contiguous districts and some compared to us. When you look at Minnetonka, their fund balance, their unassigned fund balance at the end of FY23 was at 11.16%. Edina was at 11.2%. So just as a comparative point, I know we talk about a lot of times that we do obviously prefer to have it above that 7%. And really, when you put it into perspective, that's about 3.5 to 4 weeks of operating expenditures for us. So these are slides that you're probably familiar with seeing when my predecessor presented. I just like to show these because I had a mentor years ago that told me stop putting a ton of numbers on a page and make it look colorful and add some graphics to it. So this I found was a really good one that Dee Dee did, but this kind of points out where our revenue sources come from. So you might look at this, and just as a comparative with new board members, this isn't necessarily the norm across the state. I can tell you, because we have a very supportive community, that's why you see our property taxes at 34% of our revenues. It's also the breakout of kind of the makeup of the district and the property, because in districts outstate, you're going to see state aid revenues closer to that 80 to 90%, and you're going to see your property taxes. I think when I was in Redwood Falls, that was close to about 10% of our revenues. So it can fluctuate, and that's why we're very appreciative of our supportive community. So revenue planning notes, again, this might be kind of continuation of things we've talked about, but I think they're kind of important to point out several times. So we'll be going back to the 2% when we're doing our budget planning, so roughly 1.8 to 2 million in new money. But just as a comparative, if you factor our expenditures are made up of about 71% salaries and benefits, and you figure just give an average of 3.5% on 145 million, we're already spending 5 million just in salaries when we're getting 2 million on 60% of our dollars. So it kind of goes back to what Dr. Anderson's talked about, kind of a bad business model, and just something important to point out. The special education cross subsidy and the federal dollars to pay tuition bills. I know I talked about the cross subsidy, so I won't touch on that again, but the district did find an opportunity to really help and curb some of our special education costs while being able to add support to the district. This was something that I'd come across at a past position when I was at a cooperative, and then with the help of Dave Draskovich and Jen Walk with meeting with MDE, Wayzata was eligible to basically utilize our federal dollars to pay our tuition bills, which then we shift costs from that were being covered by our federal into our special education costs into 740, which then generates additional revenue. So it basically generates an additional 75%. So we can pay down every dollar of our tuition bills, And then when we shift over $1.5 million of our federal dollars, we'll get about 75 cents back on that. So it's additional revenue that wasn't forecasted that the finance team, along with the other executive directors and directors, creatively figured out that it would be a good option for us. And I think we had a lot of meetings on it. And then I think we triple checked with the state. So our finance team is made up of the finest paranoid people, so me included. So we always like to double check, but that was a big win for us. I think it will allow the district in the coming year to see some reprieve, especially in our elementaries and other areas where we can get some additional help in special ed where they're seeing a big need for it.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Can you explain the tuition bills? I don't understand.
Tuition bills. Jen, do you want to kind of touch on that one? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Each district has to pay other districts for students that they're serving. So our residents who are attending school in any other district in our surrounding area or Intermediate District 287, we pay the excess special ed costs for those, just like we get money in for any students who are not residents that we're providing services for. And so we're able to use these federal dollars to pay for those bills to allow us to, as Scott said, shift some expenses over to the state budget.
Perfect. All right. Excellent. Thank you, Jen. I told David and Jen they didn't have to sit up here, but I did warn them. So, but that was a big find for us. And so we're excited about that. It will allow us to, obviously there's always risks with that, but we weighed those out. A risk would be that obviously then our maintenance of effort increases, which as you guys know, we have to spend $1 more than we did the prior year. Based on the current environment, we don't see those costs decreasing in any time in the near future. And we did talk about mitigation strategies. If that did shift, we would have a way to kind of scale back those costs and right size things. So enrollment increases, we're forecasting additional enrollment growth above the initial forecast from our last demographic study. If you remember, that was the fall that I started in fall of 2022. So we have picked up some of that enrollment growth and we've gone above next year what even the high kindergarten, high migration was. So trying, like I said, to be conservative in our budgeting approach, but also try to be as realistic as we can because we know the stakes are high and we want to have the least impact on our students and teachers and our learners. Our federal allocation, I touched on this, our COVID dollars as well. We'll see those final dollars come to an end in our upcoming fiscal year. This just is the exact same thing, but for expenditures. So you can see here, I alluded to it, but on average, about 71% of our expenditures are made up of our staff are made up of administrative support in our buildings and grounds and all the areas that help support a district. Obviously, we're in the business of educating students and we do that with people. So it makes sense that our costs would be up like this. Ours can be a little skewed when you might look at other districts, you might see a higher percentage. And that is just because with our LTFM dollars, that really increases the overall budget area. And because we are as a pay-as-you-go, we can have higher amounts to cover more projects. So by default, that decreases the percentage, but on average for us, it's around 71%. Purchase services, that's right around the 16%. So LTFM is kind of split up between purchase services and capital purchases. The reason that you might go, I would think LTFM would be capital because you'd be doing projects. It's because we contract with companies and that's coded. I won't go into the depths of UFAR's coding, but it's coded to a 305, which then falls under purchase services. The things that we would buy directly, those would be coded in the 500s, which would be in the capital purchases. All right, so expenditure planning notes, this is kind of hitting on some things we did too. So special education costs, we're projecting over 10% growth from last fiscal year to current fiscal year into next fiscal year. So I just can't reiterate how we are seeing those increased needs. So we were very, very thankful for the dollars we got in the cross subsidy from the state, but we also think there's a bigger thing that needs to be addressed that I think we'll probably see statewide. So I think we're also seeing, Jen, and you might know, 287, they're not accepting new kids as well. A lot of their programs are full. I know the cooperative that I came from is also not taking new students. So there's just high needs right now. So cost containment, like I pointed out, we're continuing with the cost containment into this next current fiscal year. So that's part of our planning. And we're still recovering from the COVID pandemic. We also have negotiations coming up with some of our groups this summer that will potentially impact the general fund and our costing. So a lot of times people will come back and when we do our revised budget, they'll say, holy smokes, you guys don't know what you're doing. We go off the best available information that we have at the time, and we have to make a lot of budget assumptions because we're working on this in March, April, May, presenting it to you in June. And that's before really we know anything is what is actually going to happen. We also have a lot of things in our budgets where we have to hold spots. So if we wanted to adjust the budget and pull out those, we could probably look way closer. But for example, if we have a job that's sitting open that isn't filled, that still has to be held in our budget, right? All right. I should have made this screen bigger. I hope my eyes are good. All right. So cost containment, this is kind of the history and going forward. So as I put here, and again, these slides kind of all lean on each other, and that's kind of purposeful because I think it needs to send kind of that message. But just a reminder, the earlier slides, just the lack of funding, and that's compounded over the years. So I think that's a really big thing to point out. The continued pandemic impact, I know you've heard it a million times, but I also think it's important when we're talking about budget planning because we have to ask ourselves, well, how did we get here? So even though it seems like in the past, like I said, we are still navigating those huge financial impacts caused by the pandemic. As you recall, during that pandemic year, the district had been experiencing 200 to really almost 300 some year growth with new students. We not only did not get that, but we also lost 200 students because we live in an area where parents were able to make choices and they had some options very close. So I think that's really important to point out because just that alone, we saw almost a loss of $4 million in revenue that year. As you recall, during that same time period when COVID was hitting, I don't think it could have hit worse for a school district because it happened in the spring, right? It happened right around this time period. So what are we doing this time period? March, we're getting ready to hire, we're going out, we're securing staff. All that was in place. And then this happened. And then you could go, well, why didn't you let people go? Well, if you recall, it was first going to be a pause for a couple weeks, and then it turned into a month, and then it was just continued on. And there was a real emphasis, and I think a lot of us remember it, where the state was telling us not to let people go. So we stayed loyal and committed to our staff members, which inevitably cost the district. So there was a lot of unknowns at the time, so it's really easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. But if we remember the time that we were living in, there was so many unknowns and we were just trying to react and do the right thing based on the information we had, which at the time wasn't a lot. So as I pointed out, with that loss there, it was close to $4 million hit for us, plus the expenditures are growing on the other side. So that's how we get up north of that like $5, $6, $7 million range. And then it just keeps compounding. If you look at the enrollment, if you go back to, and I have it right here, I should have had it out. Jen Welk and I looked at this morning, but if you go back and look, in FY 1920, we're at 12,011 students, and this isn't ADM, this is an average daily membership. These aren't weighted. These are just kind of kids in seats. So we were at 12,011. We dropped back down to 11,870 in FY 22, went up to 11,875, so increase only 5 students. Then we started to see some increase in last year to 12,145. And then in the current year, we are currently at 12,428. But if you look at those numbers and you go back to FY20 when we're at the 12,000 mark, the next year when we're at 11,870, we should have been at 12,261. The following year, we're at 11,875. We should have been at 12,511. And not reading through all of them, but that means this current year we should have been over 13,000 students. So if you just do the quick math on that and factor an average growth of 250 students a year, that means over that time period, the district missed out on $11.4 million that we would have had in the bank if the pandemic wouldn't have happened. So I don't mean to keep touching on the pandemic, but it had an absolute profound impact for the district. And you can say, well, why do other districts not see that? If you live in a very stable district where you have very little enrollment growth, you wouldn't have been impacted nearly as much, right? Because you wouldn't have staffed for additional students coming in. You wouldn't have likely had the parents that had choices and made the choices to send their kids to privates or homeschool. So they didn't see the massive fluctuation that we did. And you have to look and you would say, they did the right thing at the time because we had decades worth of data and reporting that showed that we were getting this growth every year. So why would you not have planned on it? So, and then like I said, obviously we stayed loyal to our staff and tried to hold on to people as absolutely as long as we could, and it cost us. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting statistic to point out. And the legislative changes, new funding, I talked about this, really helped a lot, but we didn't feel all areas were considered and addressed. I think they took a very macro level approach, and again, very respectfully because we're very grateful of the dollars we got, but each district, as I just explained, was impacted very differently by the pandemic. I think we can even say even with the food service dollars, we're grateful to have the free lunches, but maybe those dollars could have been utilized in different ways for different districts. So based on the need. And then the unfunded mandates that I talked about, and that was part of our revised budget too, part of that $5 million swing. We had almost a $900,000 that was part of our literacy incentive aid that can no longer be supplanted. And we have to, basically becomes a new cost on top of there. And then again, our increased special education need costs were another key driver in that big change on our revised budget from last month. All right, and then the cost containment. So it will be something, another area of focus that we do next year. We're constantly modifying it too. So I know people like to fall in love with documents that we publish, and I always like to put asterisks on everything for people that work with me, but they will change. I guarantee they'll change. So we're constantly monitoring. We're constantly looking at creative ways that we can find to be more efficient. And this will be something that will be talked about. I know there'll be a communication going out tomorrow from our communications team, but we'll talk about the cost containment and kind of some updates on it. I already touched on some of them with why we're here due to the pandemic. We're also seeing, we're not keeping up with the inflationary pressures with our new revenues. And then just kind of highlight some of the areas, even from an administrative standpoint. We looked internally and we looked at attrition and we looked where we could become more efficient. And that's been a big focus. So just kind of running through some of them, we'll look at close to $375,000 in reductions in administration. And those are direct administration, like in our building, in the not the DAB, in the DSC building. Those are cost reductions that will happen in positions. The elementary schools, this year, very low impact. There was a slight change from moving administrative professionals from 12 months to 11 months for a small savings of $26,000. And then our high schools and middle schools, this will be the year that they'll see some impact. So they'll be right around that $850,000 to $900,000 range. And then finally, we did see some transportation cost savings. And also we did see some revenue increases based on some open enrollment that we're projecting in grades 9 and 10. Right now, we're estimating net of cost of staff about $360,000 in new revenue. And then we're also seeing about $72,000 between increased athletic activity fees and increased parking fees. And those are things that will come to the board at the beginning of April for your review and approval. So we're looking at right around that $2.6 million in cuts in the coming fiscal year. All right, and then just kind of like I pointed out, looking forward in the long-term sustainability, financial sustainability of the district. That's why we're always looking at. So as I mentioned, starting in FY26, we start to see that kind of teeter down. So I know it can get really confusing, but we feel like it's our obligation to be forecasting years out. Obviously, that data can become less reliable the farther you get out. But even in a few short years, we start to see that decrease. And I think from the presentation today, you can see kind of the pressures that cause that fund balance to decrease, and I know we've hit on it before, but and I wasn't here, but during the pandemic, the district sat in a position where I think it was around 11% fund balance, and I can't imagine if we wouldn't have had that during the pandemic. So I think it's just important to keep the bigger picture in mind, because it is hard to see when we're making cuts in classrooms, and we're making cuts across the district, and you're seeing that we're projecting, $2 million plus revenue over expenditure. I think it's really important to keep in mind the big picture, and I can do a better job of explaining that when I do go through the budgeting. All right, so enrollment projections. Enrollment is the key driver for projecting revenue. So I think that's always the joke in all schools is 2 ways to get let go from your position. And my job would be is if we weren't counting kids right. So it is an absolute critical thing. It's kind of the building block for our revenue. It's what we set in place, and then we build our expenditures from that. So as I pointed out, we had the demographic study done in 2022. That's when it was presented to the board. The original assumptions at that time, and we were coming out of a pandemic, there was a ton of unknowns. I think the data became less reliable. We went with a conservative approach of high migration and low kindergarten because that's what we were experiencing. Updated assumptions based on enrollment, we're experiencing significant growth on top of that. So we're now exceeding that study's high migration, high kindergarten. So even in the current year, when we did our prelim, we did that based off of 12,296. That was up to our 11/1/2023 number of 12,408. And then we're increasing our estimate to 12,684 in the next year. I think Dr. Anderson will talk about that during his presentation, but we are planning for another demographic study as we look towards the future. This, I believe most of you have seen this. This is just the numbers kind of rolled up for the projections by each year. And this is just a really high level assumption. So current enrollment and substance for current year that I just talked about, and then next year and the following year. So you can see we're having steady growth. So that's where it can absolutely become very confusing to families, staff, and students even, where they look like, hey, we're growing. Like, what's wrong? What's going on? So that's why I spent so much time just kind of focusing on why we're here, how we got here, and why we're doing what we're doing. We are also very lucky that we have the enrollment growth, because if that wouldn't have come back, it would have been a different situation. And so when I talk about we're constantly reviewing and monitoring the cost containment process, it's because we're watching our enrollment projections significantly, because as those increase, obviously that means more revenue for us. Depending on where those kids come into our district, we can also kind of benefit from economies of scale, if they're going into a smaller class, which then decreases costs. So those are all big things. So that's why we kind of highlight, and I mentioned just not to fall in love with the document, because we are constantly monitoring and changing. This is just quick budget assumptions. I'm probably over my time, Dr. Anderson. So I'm going to burn through this. You guys have seen these, but these are just our projections that I talked about earlier. Salaries and benefits, I will point out just a couple of things on this. The expenditure assumptions. Let me get to this real quick, I'm sorry. Just to point out, just because they're pretty large numbers, and with the HR team handling this, they do such a fantastic job, and why we always point out health insurance, because that makes up almost $16 million of that budget. So that's a really big budget, and they do a great job with that. And they're facing a lot of upward pressure right now. So I always like to point that out, because that is a really critical area, and we're thankful for the management of that. TRA, this is kind of a very interesting thing, because for several years, the increases were very small, and they are increasing at a very rapid rate. If you look at this, in beginning of FY 23-24 that we're in, it was at 8.55, it jumps to 8.75, and then in 25, in 7/1/2025, it jumps to 9.5. Those are direct costs for employers. So that's a pretty huge cost that we have zero control over. As you can see, para, clearly those funds are kind of doing different things. So para's remaining very similar. It's remaining the same, which is huge. And then you can see here just our other estimated expenditure assumptions. So next steps, we will be continuing our planning and we'll be working on, we're continuing to work on our preliminary budget. At the same time, we're going to be working on our revised budget, which I mentioned below, because the two go hand in hand. Doing that second revision really helps lay the groundwork, as I mentioned, for our prelim budget next year. And then we'll come back to the board probably next December, January with a revision on the budget that we present to you in June. The legislative session, we can keep our fingers crossed, and maybe Dr. Anderson can talk about that during his, but we're hopeful, but we're not planning on anything. So we're kind of staying the course, and then if we would get anything additional, that would be fantastic. And then, like I mentioned, the school board adopts the budget before July 1st. All right, that was a lot of talking. I should have brought my water up. So any questions that the board has?
Well, Scott, let me start by saying thank you. That was extremely comprehensive. I think we all needed it. I think our community needed to hear it. It's really important that you take us through step by step the way that you did. So very much appreciate that. And I appreciate your team for being here tonight. Board colleagues, what are your questions? Because I know you have many. Paris.
All right. And I echo what Heidi said. Thank you for all the details. I know it's complex, and when you try to simplify, it's not easy. So I have two questions. One is straightforward. Second, if we need more time, we can come back and revisit. But the first is, typically when we go through our budgeting cycle, right, we are being conservative, which makes sense. It changes, certain parameters change over the period of time. So typically when we get into surplus situation, right, what do we do? Do we just move that money into our reserves, or how that surplus gets utilized?
Kind of just straightforward. So dollars that we would use, that would be kind of our unassigned dollars. Basically, when we'd utilize our assigned dollars or restricted dollars, everything that, like, let's say we projected we were going to spend $1 million in unassigned fund, and let's say we only spend $800,000. That $200,000 would then would go into that unassigned fund, and it would grow that. And that's where you see like our 6.85% fund balance at the end of this last fiscal year. That's what drops into that. So you also, outside of your unassigned, you have your assigned funds that were noted in the audit, and then we have our restricted funds. So a lot of it, and I know in an explanation with some people over the last few weeks, they had asked the question like, holy smokes, how can you be off in some of your stuff like this? There's a lot of moving parts. One of it, for example, to answer your question and not to digress too much, is with our LTFM dollars. So we plan on, I think last year we budgeted about $16 million in LTFM. I think we only spent, if David had to run grab his kiddo, but I think we spent closer to like 8.9 to 9.5 million. Well, that basically inflates your revenues for a short period of time, and then there's a negative adjustment on your future levy to pull those dollars back that you didn't spend. So it will sit as a reserved amount, but it goes away. We also have other restricted dollars like our capital dollars, or some of our other dollars that have to be restricted. So I'm trying not to go deep into the woods and keep it there, but basically everything that's outside of restricted dollars, what we save goes into that unassigned fund. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I know we are running out of time here. And for instance, where I was trying to get at it, we go through, let's say, cost containment, and now there are certain, making it up, teachers' positions have been eliminated, right? But then we later find out, hey, we now have surplus. So that surplus goes as unassigned. But then do we have any opportunities now that we have surplus, and based on our forecasting methodologies, if we were to revise our approach, is there any opportunity to bring that fund back, especially when it comes to teachers or increasing or reducing the class sizes, that type of thing? That's where I was trying to get at.
Okay.
How do we use that? And again, I know we're not going to have all answers, but
Sure.
Is that probably area where we should look at as we go through our budgeting cycle, or that is something, for whatever reason, we cannot do it?
I think that's the long-term approach, I think, and Dr. Anderson or Executive Director Stacy Voss can step in too, but that is our approach, and that's the approach we're taking with the cost containment, because you're absolutely right. Could we take that $2 million this year that we're projecting over and put it all back in? Yes, but then we're going to be cutting next year. When you add on those expenses, they then go to the bottom of that P&L, right? And then those costs grow at a higher rate than the revenue we're getting, and then we're just in a continued cycle of cost containment. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think we probably need to revisit that. I know we'll go through more cycles. So I'll table that for now.
Perfect.
So the second question is, again, we looked at, again, I like the chart. It's very clear, 60% government revenue, 36% comes from local taxes, right? And oftentimes we hear from our community members that, hey, Plymouth is building so many new communities and houses, right? And again, new construction is close to $1 million per house.
Yeah.
So how does that reflect in our calculation? Again, when you look at Minnetonka, Edina, same thing, right? In fact, there aren't too many new constructions happening versus our school district. We are still growing in terms of residential real estate. So when you look at the 34% tax dollar or bucket, what have we seen? Has it not helped us, or that is still helping us but not really keeping up with inflation?
No, I think it's absolutely helping us. That's been kind of the savior for us to have that 34%. So we are absolutely grateful of the public, of our district support that we get from our residents, because inside of there is also our tech levy dollars, which allows us to provide kind of world-class technology support and technology that we have in our schools. So that is really the silver lining. And like I mentioned, we're at $40. We have $40 worth of cap room right now per student, which would only generate an additional $500,000. So to answer your question, it's absolutely very appreciated. And that's one of the areas that gets closest to keeping up with inflation for us. But then to your question about new houses being built, the levies spread across that. So that's why when we've looked at future projections or bond issues, you see extremely low impact on a regular tax base, because there's so much property that it spreads throughout. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you for that. You told us a lot about, things that are unknown or that, you really can't know. And that's why we have such a huge buffer.
Yep.
And you talked about the unknowns of, SPED. And I'm wondering, what are the costs of that? Is that teacher salaries and benefits? Is that what category that goes into, or is that in its own special category?
That's in its own special category. But of course, just like everything else, and how our budget is made up of roughly 70% salaries and benefits, it would probably be very close in special ed, if not more, because it would probably be much higher, closer to 100%, because it's staff providing those services. Of course, you'd have equipment or other things that you would purchase, but it would be very based on just humans taking care of students. So to kind of answer your question too, it would be salaries and benefits, but just a reminder, we are mandated to take care of those kids. And it's very difficult because you can't look and say, okay, we had, 100 new kids that were in special ed this year. They can have a variety of different disability areas that could require more, closer to a 1-to-1 or lower class size ratios. So that's where you really see a big, strong increase in cost. And that's why tuition bills for most districts are extremely, extremely high.
Sorry. So the humans that are hired for SPED are paid out of the SPED fund, they're part of. Are all staff lumped into the salaries and benefits together, whether they're SPED teachers or?
Yeah, as we present it, and they're all, and Stacy Voss could speak to this as well, but they're all part of the teacher's contract. So they would all be lumped into the budget that we present. But you're absolutely right, they're coded to a different area. They have to meet the licensure requirements, and they have to meet those requirements, and then they're coded to, for example, 740, which would be our state special ed, and then they're put into a system, and that's reviewed. Jen gets that done by November 30th of each year. And then based on those dollars, once that year closes, so we're always at least a year lag, then those dollars would come in. So on an average staff, like you mentioned, we'd now be looking to get closer to 75% reimbursement on that staff member. Does that help? I hope I answered
It
that.
does, yes, thank
Okay.
you. So some of the differences we see in like amount spent on salaries and benefits is because of negotiations, because you're making a preliminary budget and then the actual ends up being higher. Or, I mean, because I don't think we added that many teachers, but it seemed to go up quite a bit from preliminary to actual. So is that because of negotiations?
No, not necessarily. We had different needs that popped up throughout the year. And then kind of, I had talked to it a little bit earlier, but we had an adjustment with what we do with our OPEB, with our health insurance costs. And that was kind of a line share of, that was a huge part of it. And that was basically how we were recording revenue. And it was past practice that was changed due to the direction of what we felt internally and was supported by our auditor. And then in addition, I kind of alluded to some of those big changes were the unfunded mandates or the change in language to statute that then doesn't allow us to use those same dollars that we were using on certain people. We could no longer use those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wonder also, would it partially be due to increased student enrollment and therefore more staff? Would that raise the total, or am I not?
That would be part of it too. Yeah. And that why when you look at the revised budget from, and I apologize, I should have had that as part of my presentation. But you do see the big swing there that I kind of talked about, the reasons for that $5 million increase. But then if you look up top, we also had reflected in increased state aids, and that includes those new students. And that also includes an increase that we felt with our state special ed with the cross subsidy as we learned more about it and became more comfortable with it through conversations with MDE and kind of really analyzing our stuff. We felt a little more confident on increasing that revenue projection. Like I said, it's always in the best interest to have a conservative approach to budgeting, but we're mixing that conservatism along with kind of the reality of the situation. And typically, your people in budgeting are very risk averse. We're just trying to keep very informed and be creative with our approach and just making sure we're talking to all the right people.
Scott, can I just make one thing very clear? If you could answer this, year after year, the cross subsidy, the special ed cross subsidy, is it covered by our unassigned fund balance?
Yes, the remaining 25% for currently until FY27 is absolutely covered by the unassigned.
Okay, thank you.
General fund. Yep.
Any other questions, board colleagues?
I might put you on spot. So to be honest, I suspect you're not ready for that, but maybe next time. I'm curious hearing that how much special ed takes. I'm curious if you would be able to show next time through several years how many students we had. Price, how many students, what kind of price we spent, and how many students we have nowadays. And I suspect that question would be more for, I don't know if it's HR. I'm curious why we have such an increase on special ed.
We obviously, we would want to come back to the board with that. That's actually, honestly, we will for sure come back with that. We've already done that analysis, so that will be easy for us to pull together. I can bring that the next work session. We'd be glad to do that, but I think, and Jen, I don't want to put you on the spot either, but in the past, Wayzata just hasn't seen the special ed needs that we have, and we are always a very low free and reduced district, which I think we're one of the lowest in the state. And through the pandemic and just through some of the developments in our district, we're seeing kind of a higher need. Obviously, we're seeing our EL, as I know the previous presentation alluded to, we're just seeing a lot higher need students. We're seeing different things than we've ever seen before. So Jen, offhand, do you remember just our increase was pretty substantial, free and reduced rise, right? Okay. So I apologize, we don't have that data for you today, but that's something we can absolutely put together and share with you at the next
As I
work
said, I
session.
understand that I put you on spot. Next time, totally fine. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you for the question.
Sarah?
Yeah, and we have some of that information on our published audits and things in the past that the public and every board member can access at any given time. So that's important. Scott, on that note, just is it important to also understand that in Wayzata, because we've been a district with growing enrollment, which we have been a little less of, but we continue to do, even when our EL costs or our free and reduced costs are those numbers of students, even though they may be growing, and so our district is being faced with a higher need from each one of those areas, because our overall enrollment is growing, it may look from a concentration standpoint, and therefore the amount of money that we get standpoint, we're not getting as much because they measure it on a concentration, yet the needs that we are seeing in our district and the students that are coming in are still there. So because of this concentration ratio, our funding may not accurately reflect.
Agreed. Yeah, I think if I understood you correctly, essentially we are seeing that student growth return, but of that group, of that growth that we're seeing, we're not reaping the full revenue benefits of that because we have some higher cost students coming to the district. And so obviously then that impacts the bottom line.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, board colleagues? Scott, thank you. This was really, really informative. I very much appreciate it. Even though you went over your time, I think that was time very well spent. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Anderson, Scott, our next item on the agenda is the enrollment and class size update. You have 20 minutes, but
All right.
I'll give you a little more.
Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to present tonight along with Scott Lesage. I should have reflected that in my proposal on the cover page here, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time speaking about enrollment history, current enrollment, and class sizes tonight. So this could be a lot more comprehensive. I would consider tonight's presentation sort of a primer, if you will, to more depth and greater information, either a month or 2 months from now, maybe both, just to kind of keep the board updated. So Scott indicated in his presentation the importance about tracking enrollment, getting the student numbers right, and it's something that we don't take lightly. I did want to focus the conversation tonight or the presentation tonight really on these three key things. I thought it would be helpful, given particularly that we have relatively newer board members, doing a little bit of historical overview of our student enrollment and growth information, taking a look at our current reality and also future enrollment projections and attendance area considerations, only to plant a seed that that's future work that is pending and forthcoming. Again, I think you're going to see a few of the things in this report that will be reflective of what you just heard from Scott's report, because they are so integrally connected, is enrollment and attendance for the future and all the financial implications for that. So this is a chart that I don't know, I found somewhere online. I thought, yeah, that pretty much describes the school district. That's us where we were on the left back in 2008 when I joined the team here in Wayzata. And the bar to the far right, that could be compared to 23, 24 and beyond. And we have kind of been a rocket. There was just one decrease in altitude of that red arrow that Scott mentioned, and that was in that COVID year, the 2020, 2021 school year, which I'll hit on here a little bit in a moment. So I remember interviewing for this position in the late or early winter of 2007, and one of the things I heard, I couldn't specifically indicate any one person, but I think generally, we're really not planning on growing too much in the district. We have a pretty flat growth curve, and I had just been in a district where we had done, millions of dollars worth of construction, and they weren't anticipating at the time building new schools, adding on new classrooms, or getting too involved in construction. And I was pretty excited about that because I thought, yeah, that'll be okay. because I've done that, and it'll be fun to move on to some other things. Well, as you know, we've built 2 elementary schools since that time, and early learning school, big wing onto our high school, and we've added classrooms onto several of our buildings and done a lot of long-term facilities maintenance. So I think this curve is pretty indicative. I think there were 9,500 students in the fall of 2008 when I started, and we have closer to 12,500 that we're planning for the coming year. And as Scott said earlier, we'd be closer to 13,000 had we not had that. We think if it had stayed true to the projections, that's the number we probably would be closer to. So this has been alluded to already tonight, but this shows that growth, K-12 growth and a percentage change. If you look at the numbers to the far right, the more common number for us has been about a 2% growth every year. You have heard us speak ad nauseum about the 2021 school year. There it is, down 183 students. And if you take that 183 and add it to a whole number of 267, which is the increase to the fiscal year 23, that gets you to, I think, exactly 450 students, which that's the number we've been talking about. So you have to add the whole numbers of minus 183 to the plus 267. That was the whole that we experienced in that school year. And then the next year was kind of flat. We're down about 8 kids, so about a 0% growth rate. But we staffed accordingly for that, unlike the year before, as Scott indicated earlier, because we didn't have a script and we didn't know what was going to happen to enrollment in the fall of 2020. So anyway, over that time period, that 5-year enrollment history up to the current fiscal year, despite that, we've still increased by 540 kids if you add the 450 into that from 1920 and 2021. You're looking at another close to 1,000 kids more, close to that 13,000, 1,000 instead of 544. This is some historical information also. I think it's kind of interesting just to look at the totals if you go out to that 2009-2010 school year and look at the elementary schools on the left. You'll notice Meadow Ridge and Northwoods are not there yet. You see some relatively larger numbers for some schools that currently don't have relatively larger numbers of students. So Birchview, for example, had 646 kids. It actually was very crowded at Birchview at one point, and we made some changes, moved some students over to Sunset Hill. And now down the road, Birchview's undercrowded, Sunset Hill's kind of right on that border and a bit overcrowded right now. Gleason Lake and Greenwood at 647 is now 800 or so. And you can see that Oakwood is still one of our smaller schools. Sunset Hill had 586. I think they have 110 or so more. And then also noticing over that time period of that 5-year period, there was about a 7.5% growth rate during that time frame. So I highlighted those yellow blocks, and I don't have knowledge of this, but there must have been an attendance area change or something, because Birchview went up, Gleason Lake went up, and Plymouth Creek went down. But if you go to the right down Plymouth Creek, you see that it grew pretty significantly quickly. So that I think there was some planning. Pardon?
Plymouth Creek was at Central Middle School, I think, we took kindergarten from Plymouth Creek out and put them at Central Middle School in 2006, 2007, right?
It's possible that it was done then also. It was done one time during the time I've been here, so occasions. So I had that thought, but I thought, no, that was when I was here, but maybe
you're right.
Prior to as well. So,
and if I may also, not to,
yep.
I do believe there was a time when, that 2006-2007 year, where the Bon Air neighborhood of Maple Grove was going to Plymouth Creek, but they were quickly moved to Kimberly Lane.
Okay.
So that might also explain a little bit of it.
Yeah, maybe there's a bump in Kimberly Lane there too, but I don't know. Something happened in that year because those numbers, and I even went back and double checked it. I thought, I bet I copied those down wrong, but I was able to verify them in a couple other places. The next slide shows secondary. If you go out to the 2009-2010 school year, it's kind of interesting. If you know the numbers for Central, East, and West right now, Central Middle School had 887 kids. East Middle School, 777, and West Middle School, 729. So again, a growth in middle school over those 5 years of about 4.5%. And the high school had about 3,200 students at that time. And as you know, that has gone up also. Now looking at Central Middle School, recalling back here, 887. Here it's 1546. East Middle has dropped down to 674, and West is at 714. So again, some changes significantly there. As you know, we've made some administrative attendance area changes for next year to bring some relief to Central, add students to East and West, and we'll continue to monitor that to make sure that's sustainable in some form or fashion into the future, because East and West are both smaller buildings than Central, as I think you're aware. And the high school at 3,711 compared to that 3,200 from back in that earlier set of projections. And again, at the secondary level over these 4 years, I'm only using 4 years because I used the COVID year as sort of the baseline. I didn't go back before that because there'd be this weird dip and drop in students. So we've been kind of using that 4-year time frame. This is kind of an interesting data, I think. So this demonstrates open enrollment students in the district from 05-06 through 09-10. You can see that we had about 900 kids open enrolled into the district in 05-06 and over 1,100 in 09-10. In 23-24, we had 186. There's a statutory requirement to have an equivalent of up to 1% per grade level, which for us is 8 or 9, 10 kids probably per grade level. Which it's not too far off, you know, if you extrapolate the numbers up. Plus we take in siblings, and there was a recent statutory change to accept staff member children in open enrollment as well. So that has brought that up a little bit beyond that 1%. As you're also aware, at the high school, we're going to be bringing in some 9th and 10th graders through open enrollment. I estimated maybe that'll bring us up about 60 kids, it looks like right now, that are looking like really good possibilities for the fall at the high school. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of history on the enrollment options. And if we would have had a chart, and I didn't put this one together, I could have dug up the information. But if you go from 2010 to 2023, you would see kind of a steady decline as those kids aged out, because we stopped taking open enrollment because we didn't have capacity. We didn't have space. We were growing so fast. We were building for our resident students and not in order to accommodate more open enrollment students. I thought it'd be interesting for you to see the districts where students were coming from. So Osseo, Robbinsdale, Minneapolis were the top 3, and then to our west, Rockford, Orono, Hopkins. You can see the rest, but that added up to the 1,100 plus students in both 09 and 2010 school years. So now moving on to, that's a little bit of history, and now moving on to our current reality with our enrollment numbers. I think it's kind of interesting to take a look at the K-12 pipeline. So we have pre-K kids on our system. And I highlighted in yellow because that's the cohort kind of moving through to that year right before they start kindergarten. So you can see that 604 grows into 1,019. So as they get older, I think we improve on our ability to find them and get them onto our list. Plus, a lot of families move in with young children, pre-K age children. So those numbers continue to grow from that. And so you can see the progression up about 400 kids over that time frame in regard to who we have in our system. And this forms that base or the foundation for our K-12 programming at the entry level into kindergarten. This slide shows enrollment numbers for this current year. The formatting's off a little bit there with the totals on the bottom, but in 2022, we had about 12,123 students. This year, 12,404, for an increase of about 281 students. And the next graph will look, or slide will look very similar to that one, but this is that same set of numbers with projected versus actual. So we projected 12,259. And we ended up with 12,404. So we had 145 more students this year on the projections than what we were anticipating. So up 281, but 145 of those went beyond what we had projected and built our plan for. This is current enrollment data for 23-24. Again, I'm not going to read through all of the numbers, but if you look out, if you remember just point of note, Birchview at 455 students. You'll remember that approximate 200 more students at Birchview at one point, which was very tight for Birchview at the time. And again, part of the reason that we made those changes when we did. And some of our larger buildings, obviously Meadow Ridge and Northwoods are two of our larger buildings. Sunset Hill and Greenwood also accommodating quite a number of students. So this is, as I said before, something that we're going to be needing to take a look at is where our students live and where they're attending their schools, and can we capitalize on available space in some of our buildings while at the same time bringing some relief to those that we know are going to continue to grow. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later. This is kind of an interesting set of data, I think, that I put together just to give you a visual for where we're at in regard to our staffing targets. So if you look at the left box, it shows what our staffing ratio or staffing target is. Really, that's sort of the starting number. And it's kind of confusing, and maybe some of my colleagues will share their perspectives as well if you have any questions on this. But we take a look at the staffing target, and then when we get to a point where it's that number plus 3 in each one of those elementary sections, and I'm really focusing on elementary tonight more so than middle and high school for class sizes, but when we get to that point where we go beyond 3 above that number, that's when then we consider adding another section at that particular grade level. The reason that you kind of need to build that number up a little bit is because you need a group of kids to create the new section. And if you're at the target number and go over 1 student and use that as your toggle point, now you're -3 and it's not efficient. You can't afford to do that. But I color coded because I thought it would be helpful for you to see. The green shaded is where they're at or below the staffing target and within that class size range. The yellow indicates they're above that staffing target, but they're still within that +3 staffing range. And I think that's the case for all the yellow shaded, and I thought it would just be helpful for you to see. I think if I would have put together this chart every year I've been here, and every year in my previous district when I charted enrollment projections as well, there would be green and there would be yellow based on whatever the criteria is. And it's because of where families live and how old their kids are and which school they go to. And it's just an imperfect science. So these are, this is for Birchview, Gleason Lake, and Greenwood. This is the same definitions, criteria for Kimberly Lane, Meadow Ridge, and Northwoods. And again, I know that you'll take a look at these, or perhaps already have, but I won't go through each school and grade level. You'll be glad to know probably, but these are for Oakwood, Plymouth Creek, and Sunset Hill. And you notice that Plymouth Creek really has quite a number over that staffing target, but again, still within the range. I think all of them are within that staffing range in the yellow. But and I don't know the real reason for why Plymouth Creek had that. Maybe because of the Hollydale change. I don't know if that's contributing. It probably isn't, at least in part. There may be other factors as well, but kind of an interesting data point there, I think, too. And then whereas with Northwoods, our largest school, they're all within that green. But again, sometimes the larger the school, although it's not necessarily true with Plymouth Creek, the easier it is to get some of that balancing. The smaller schools, it gets really pretty tricky when you have 2 or 3 making the decision between 2 and 3 sections. And then just looking into the future for future enrollment projections and attendance, as Scott said in his presentation, really that ability to project out is really important. And it's really difficult because a lot of variables can have an impact on that, as we found out a few years ago. Most differences or impacts on enrollment growth are not as significant as going through a pandemic and how it impacted us. I kind of like this graphic because it looks kind of complex and like there's a lot of moving parts, because there really is. So it's a little more complex than the one before. But we take a look at a lot of different things. We look at housing developments. We look at the previous year's historical growth within the larger district, as well as within individual schools, which gets a little bit trickier. But if you calculate kind of the percentage of incoming kindergarten students from the previous, on average, 3 to 5 years, And then if you know how many incoming kindergartners are, you take that percentage and multiply them, and that kind of gives you that starter projection. There's a lot of different ways to do it. We actually currently have 3 different sets of projections that kind of are, in sync. One of them is the set of numbers that our Welcome Center put together, which is the ones that we're using. There's also sort of the roll-up, and then you calculate what was the percentage increase. And then I fired up one of my old enrollment projection spreadsheets just to plug in the data and see if it calculated comparably, which, I think all 3 of them really kind of did. A couple of things that I wanted to just share with you in regard to the future. So we're going to do an enrollment and housing study report. We've done a number of those over the last several, I don't know, it's 15 years I've been here, plus we've probably done at least 4 of those, if not more. We're planning to do that soon. We met with one person who provides those services. We have another meeting later this week with another to take a look at what they might have to offer. And we'll be launching that soon. It's probably a 2-month study to go through all of the metrics and methodologies that they do to get a report back. We'll have a board report when that happens. Sooner than later would be really helpful with that, because if we do need to make some attendance area modifications for 0506, we need to get going on that sometime in the fall. Which ties in number 2, consideration of elementary and middle school attendance areas for 25-26. We're set for this fall. I mean, we're not going to make any changes for that. But 25-26, we may need to take a look at where our students are currently attending or will be attending then. We'll update our 5-year district enrollment projections using the new data that's coming in. Create a 5-year building enrollment plan, again, using the new data, so both a district-wide and building by building, to see where our crunch points are going to be by each one of our facilities. And then we've been kind of ongoing with our facilities planning as well. That's in progress. We're working with Wold Architects and Engineers and Kraus Anderson, our construction managers, and they have representatives that meet with us. We're going to eventually have to do something with facilities. We're just not quite sure at the current time. What that will end up being, as you know, and I like to remind not only you, I know you all know this, but our public, it's good for them to get a reminder. We do own property in Medina, which is large enough for both a new middle school and an elementary school. In the event that we'll ever need that, that would be for our 10th elementary and our 4th middle school. And we'll need to be doing some ongoing planning and preparation for determining timelines and if and when that makes good sense for us to move forward with. Possibilities related to that of a facilities referendum at some future date. No specific date has been determined for that, but we continue to have conversations about that, and the enrollment study and the housing study we think will be really helpful for that. And along with that, just planning next steps and making future considerations. So I do not have recommendations to offer here tonight in regard to, I know there's a lot of conversation and communication in our community about class sizes and what can we do to help continue to bring those down. As we build our staffing plan, and as I've explained to some who I've responded to email inquiries about this too, we work on staffing and planning all the way up to that week before school starts, sometimes even into early in the school year, and we make some adjustments after the school year started. As you might know, it's pretty difficult to add a section in mid-September. Everybody might like the idea of being able to lower class sizes, but my experience in over several decades has been people generally don't want to move their child out of an elementary classroom after they've gotten used to their teacher, and it's just really difficult. So that's why we do our very best to plan on the front end so that we can determine and calculate number of sections early on, and then we monitor that again all the way up through nearly the start of the school year to determine if we need to create a new classroom. Or sometimes there are some other models where we might add a teacher who's shared in a grade level. There could be some other staffing models. We've probably used parapros over the years to kind of help offer some additional support and help where needed. So sometimes facilities prohibit you from adding a section because you don't have a classroom. And that was really the problem we had early in my time here when Kimberly Lane and Plymouth Creek were both very crowded. and we had to implement some other types of creative solutions. So there's kind of a package of ways of dealing with that, but we really are doing our best to proactively plan on the front end so that we determine an appropriate number of sections and then do our very best to assign students in a way that would be consistent with our staffing parameters. Some have asked if we can change our staffing parameters. I think there's been some conversation in regard to budgeting. It probably would be premature to do that. Hopefully that would be a good objective for some time, hopefully in the near future, probably not for next fall. However, we do have opportunities and options to consider what we call them hotspots, as just sort of our available teacher staffing assignments that we can deploy in those classrooms that we have verified students and we know we're going to start the school year, maybe beyond that +3, or we're pretty confident it's going to go beyond that +3. And then we can plan during the summer months to deploy one of those hotspots so that we can start the year in a better place. So I think it was Scott who mentioned earlier that we look, once the ball starts rolling forward for next school year, we consider and take a look at these things almost daily. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. We're thinking about it all the time. Once February hits, we really spend a lot of our time thinking about the startup in the fall and operate within 2, or finance would say within 3 fiscal years as we continue conducting business for the current year and planning for the next school year as well. So with that, I don't think I have more slides other than questions, thoughts, or insights. I don't know, Scott, what did I leave out that you may want to add for tonight's purposes?
No, I think it was a great presentation because it just highlights the impact of enrollment. And I think it highlights how unique Wayzata is too. When you look across the state, we do have big growing enrollment, which that's a fantastic thing. And that also creates challenges and opportunities as well. So I think how you touched on that was fantastic, just to really highlight that.
One thing I failed to mention is that when we met with the first demographer that we met with, the recommendation was that we consider a 20-year study to determine, because she feels that our school district community and the footprint of the school district would likely be grown out during that time. In other words, any available space for new homes probably within that time frame is going to be built out. And she thinks that it would probably be the right time for us to do a 10-year and a 20-year just to kind of get a better feel for the long term. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you and we'll be happy to take any questions, and maybe somebody could kind of jot the questions down because I don't know that I'll have answers for all of them necessarily tonight, but that'll help as we move into our next phase of planning to know what your curiosities are and how we can best prepare.
Board colleagues, what are your questions?
Yeah, not a question, but more of a comment. Again, we all acknowledge class sizes is currently a major concern with several community members, parents, teachers. We have to do something. So again, I like your idea. I'm looking at those hotspots, I'll call it, where we have low-hanging fruits. But as we look at our budgets for next year, right? And again, this is not something we may solve overnight, right? But again, as long as we have a plan, whether it is 1 year, 2 year, up to 3 years, and maybe we bring down 31 to 29 in 1 year and 29 to 27, right? Whatever that is, I think it'll be helpful for us to present that to community, and then we can track to that. And again, I'm sure there will be challenges. We have to fine tune it. But as we look at our budgets and our next year, year after plan, if we can prioritize the class sizes and what can be done, and most importantly, if there are any options, alternatives, let's talk about those. So we can keep everyone educated, what options we looked at, what were the pros and cons, and why we think what we are recommending, right? So I think that will be helpful for all of us. So.
Yeah, points well taken. I appreciate that. And we've increased them over the years incrementally. My guess is that we'll be decreasing them incrementally as funding and resources allow. But I know it's a priority for all of my team here tonight, and also for our larger team, our principals certainly. Our teachers would appreciate it, I know, as well. So it is a priority, and I have communicated that in parent groups that I've met with about budgeting, and we'll continue to do our very best to be responsive to that in so much as we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Valentina?
I have several questions. One of them is looking at your data. Kimberly Lane and Plymouth Creek. For kindergarten is 23 plus 3 students you can add, but it shows already 26.3, which means they had been over that number. I mean, did they have some more students coming in the middle of the year? What happened?
Yeah, I would guess. So that would be the one exception. I said, I think they're the yellow shaded ones
Yes.
are all within, so that might be one of the exceptions. My guess is if it's a 0.3, there was probably 1 or 2 students that moved in during the course of the year, maybe 5, I don't know. There was something that toggled them over that, but at that point it wouldn't be practical to add a section. So it changes during the course of the year. We have a number of students that move in and a number that move out as well. But I would imagine that when it was mid-August or late August and we were taking a look at that, it was probably under that 26 range, and therefore it didn't lead toward an additional section at that time.
Because I would have said, especially for kindergarten, it's very crucial to have a lower quantity. Kids are just learning, and to be honest, this year I think at many schools seen quite a bit of behavioral problems with students, and it'll be plus for everybody, for teacher, for students, and for parents to have a peace in their mind that their kids they will have a good start of a school, of a school year experience. I mean, whole school time experience, if they will like it from the beginning. And second one, I would.
Valentina, could you move your microphone a little bit
closer? Okay, I realized. Sorry. Second one is I would agree with Paris. It would be nice to discuss. I mean, I would be curious to know if it was discussed before. Obviously, I mean, I came here, what kind of alternatives were taken into consideration? Because, to be honest, one of the thing why we're here, we are for best student outcome, and making classes bigger is not doing that, is not bringing that result. And what if you had different alternatives being considered in the past? If not, would we be able to discuss what kind of alternatives can be done? Thank you.
Thanks.
Board colleagues, Dan.
Thanks. And I totally understand there are a lot of time constraints going on right now. So if you just want to record my question, we can connect later. And in the spirit of class sizes, an ongoing dialogue we're having with constituents, parents, families, and so on and so forth. I did just want to ask about the maps as they exist now with our attendance zones, and how in Plymouth, in Corcoran, and Medina, we do have these kind of special attendance zones for right now. So they're non-contiguous, just basically a new development pops up and these students are sent to, let's say, Gleason Lake as things stand, let's say in Medina. So kind of, and you can answer this later, no pressure to answer it now, but kind of at what point does it become just a kind of a blanket redraw? So the entire western part of the district, we just redraw it instead of just little kind of special attendance zones tended to based on need.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, this is a model that we used when we were waiting for, trying to remember if it was Meadow Ridge or Northwoods, maybe both. Yeah, I think when Meadow Ridge was in progress, we had some students who were moving into Corcoran go to Oakwood, and students in Medina going to Gleason Lake, just like we're doing currently. And it's probably a model that, I don't know, we probably used it at Northwoods too. It's probably the third round with that. It's not ideal, but it works, and it brings students to buildings that have capacity, and it actually contributes to a better situation of what we've been talking about with class sizes. Because if you continue to have big growth in buildings that are already rather tight, sooner or later you run out of classrooms, and then there's nowhere to go but into the already somewhat larger classrooms. So it's a solution that has worked pretty well, and it's not the ideal for transportation time, et cetera. And we hear from parents, why does my child have to drive by 2 or 3 elementary schools in order to get to their elementary school? But when we've gone through, I mean, we've heard it kind of it all over the years when we go through attendance areas. Sometimes families that get relocated that have lived in the community for a long time in the same area question, why do all the new residents in the district displace those of us who have been here? I don't know if that's a great point of rationale or not a great point, but we hear it regularly, and it's certainly not the driving reason that we do it. But it does work for us until we can work toward a better, longer-term solution, such as maybe building a new elementary school or doing a full district redraw. I think the last time we did that was probably simultaneously with when we changed school start times. And I think we decided, let's just do it all at once. And we did. And started fresh with new start times and some new attendance areas. And I think in general, it actually worked out pretty well. We will see what the result of this enrollment study says, but it's possible that we might have a couple iterations of it. There may need to be a prerequisite change because we have some buildings that are really becoming somewhat uncomfortable. And then it could happen again if and when that new elementary and or middle school might open up in the future.
Before, Sarah, I know you have a comment, but as I was thinking back, some of the considerations of cost containment that might be really useful to our new board colleagues, I think our first year of cost containment was 21-22. Is that right? I believe that was our first year. And we had, I recall seeing several sheets, if you go back in board book, of what some of the considerations were. So for example, one that comes to my mind is we were looking at reducing our busing. And so if there were students that were within a 2-mile area, we were going to have them be walkers. And instead, the district opted to continue to give good access to school by maintaining that 1-mile radius. So there are several items that had been looked at, and if we could look back together, I think, and take a look at some of those things too. Sarah?
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple follow-ups too. I'll go backwards. So I think also, Dr. Anderson, one of the reasons why, and Dan, why we did the lack of committal, or why we have our boundaries, and there's some areas that are not assigned to an elementary school, is really for a commitment to transparency and communication with our district. When they were assigned to different elementary zones, but we didn't know when they were going to be grown out, some builders or other people would advertise that it was in this school district, and then that wasn't actually true based on the case. And so it's really important that we do our best to be proactive and accurate in what we're communicating, and not commit the district or future boards to decisions or actions that will then be problematic down the road. So it kind of fits with our commitment to not setting future boards up. A second, as it relates to Valentina's question, the kindergarten class sizes were also a conversation within HR, and Dr. Anderson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we added some para support for a couple of those kindergarten classes that toppled over. Again, a transition of a kindergartner and their first experience to a brand new elementary school when a new student moves in is not at all, but we have some abilities, and that could be used with some, and when you talk about surpluses or how we spend our dollars, that could be to do some lean in or push in para support to give the teachers support so that the children maintain a consistent classroom and they can build on the community that they were in and yet have a structured and supportive learning environment. So, and that's what we're doing now.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I failed to ask if my colleagues had anything else they wanted to add, anything I left out that you would like to share. I must have been very thorough. Thank you.
Well, before everybody moves, Dr. Sohani is on a plane right now, and he did send some comments. Now, I will disclose that he sent these comments early today before he saw anything on board book. So I'm going to honor that he asked me to read it, and just know that any follow-up should come from him. So his comments are, as much as I had hoped to be in this work session in person, a family vacation planned many months ago coincides with the discussion of a very important topic of this evening's meeting. In lieu of being present, I thought I would share a few thoughts with my board colleagues, the administration, and the community. I must disclose that at the time of writing this, I have not seen the budget preparation update on board book. My comments, therefore, are primarily with reference to last year's cost containment. This year could be different. For the first 2 years of my board tenure and until a few weeks ago this year, I believe that the class sizes were predetermined and the operating expenditure, which resulted in cost containment for the last 2 years, was able to meet the board's fund balance policy. In effect, I believe that class sizes was the cause and the fund balance was the effect. In speaking to the administration, that seems to not be the case. In order to meet our fund balance, operating expenditure has to be adjusted and a number of teachers in some programs have to be reduced. The effect of the increase is in class sizes. It's been a difficult time for the district as we navigate this cause and effect phenomenon. Parents, teachers, and the community have been loud and clear about their angst with class sizes and its negative effect on both the children and teachers. There is no magic bullet for this quagmire we find ourselves in, but we must find a solution that is based on our priorities. A few years of higher class sizes can negatively affect student learning, especially at the elementary level, which cannot be undone as they move to higher grades. This is similar to what we see in reading and math. And I'm sorry, I'm pulling up my phone because he made an edit. The fund balance is based on the operating expenditure. And he goes on to say, by board policy, our fund balance is required to be 5 to 7% of operating expenses. Our operating expenditures are about $200 million. This means every 1% of the fund balance is about $2 million. If we decide to go 1% lower on the fund balance, the $2 million in additional money we can use for expenses will amount to several more FTEs added to the district budget. He goes on to say, I am in no way implying that we do that, knowing the consequences to future budgets. It is for this reason that we have to prioritize our values, fund balance or class sizes. I urge my board colleagues and administration to put their heads together, be creative, and think of ways to mitigate the financial crunch while placing the student outcomes at the top of our minds. Signed, Malind. Again, he didn't have an opportunity to see all of the presentations, and so I feel that a lot of his concerns were addressed by it, but again, I'll let him, I had to honor reading his comments, so thank you.
I'll just close again by saying thank you for giving us the opportunity to present tonight. Scott, thanks for joining me. Aren't you glad I had you stay up here with
Absolutely.
me? I hope I was coherent. I was up at 4 a.m. driving on the roads of Plymouth, assessing roads this morning. And the result of that, I should probably apologize to the students and to the parents. You're welcome. Hope you had a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. They're topics that I know our community are really, really interested in hearing about, so I appreciate both of you very much, as I know my colleagues do. That completes our agenda for today. The time is now 6:53, and the Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for March 25th, 2024 is now adjourned.